If you listen closely to the hush before a crowd arrives, the arena tells you its first language wasn't applause. It was a funerary whisper, smoke, salt, and family debt. Long before the Colosseum taught stone to cradle thunder, the Italic dead were honoured with games that mixed banquet and blood, a duty paid to ancestors in the currency of courage. You can still feel that gravity in early sources, the monus, a duty offered for someone gone, not a holiday for the living. The path from tomb rite to civic festival is winding, but it begins on soil that thought death and honour were kin. Up in Etruria and down through Campania, you catch the earliest silhouettes, painted tomb show pairs of men confronting each other while a musician marks time. The scene is less parade than rite, a performance stitched to grief. South in Campanian cities like Capua, the practice becomes craft, leather cured to a certain temper, helmets shaped to a certain curve, a willingness to teach the body to move within armour as if it were a second skin. In these workshops, the logic of spectacle sharpened. If a family could dignify a funeral with battle, a city could dignify itself with the same, and then enlarge it. Rome, alert to every habit that could be turned into order, made this private offering public. The first recorded Roman munus, small enough to count pairs on one hand, was staged not for a holiday, but for a funeral in the old forum's shadow. The dead man's name mattered less than the precedent. In honouring one, the city discovered it could summon many. That is the hinge. The munus did not begin as a state program. It grew from families' vows, then scaled with Rome's appetite for belonging to something grand. The logic felt right to Romans because it echoed their older stories. Roman religion is practical. It trades in contracts and performances that bind community to cosmos. You do the right. The god reciprocates. In the munus, the living accepted that proof of devotion might be written on bodies. If antiquarians later imagined a line from human sacrifice to safer substitution, a fight instead of a ritual killing, what matters for us is the social chemistry. The living could demonstrate loyalty, the dead receive honor, and the crowd learn again what bravery looks like. Early fights were not yet costumed theatre. Shields and helmets were not types but equipment at hand. The ground itself was make-do leveled earth inside a wooden corral hammered together in a forum. The host, the editor, framed the day as a gift to the dead and a promise to the living. See what I am willing to spend for memory, and imagine what I might spend for you. It was piety with a signature line. Somewhere in this period, Rome learned a new word for stage, amphitheatrum. The amphitheatre is a machine for attention, a double theatre curled into an ellipse, so that eyes have nowhere else to go. Before the great stone ovals rose in capital and colony, Campania gave the form its first durable body. Pompeii's amphitheatre, older than the empire's most famous oval by a century, speaks a plain dialect of concrete and seating rows, proof that the shape itself is a technology, a bowl for crowd chemistry, a filter that turns individuals into audience. Why did Rome scale funerary duty into public calendar? Because it learned how power liked to be seen. In a city that grew by promising the world a place within law, spectacle was a kind of law applied to the senses. You seat people where they belong. You show the rich being generous, the magistrates generous with other people's dangers, the gods generous with omens on breeze and sand. It isn't an accident that the days acquired choreography, a morning of beasts to stun, a noon of justice to warn, an afternoon of duel to define. The arena braided fear, fairness and skill, until each made the other plausible. The fighters who climbed through the gate in these early centuries were not yet the catalogue no retiarius with net, no secutor with smoothed helmet blank as a moon. Many were prisoners from Italy's politics, captives from 100 small wars, debtors available to be bought, men whose contracts and brands were lines in an account book. Some, startlingly, would soon be volunteers, signing away a portion of their life for money, or food, or a wager on fame. Even then, a paradox beats the disgrace of selling your body to the arena, the strange honor of proving what a human body can do. Listen again to the right. An early pomper, the solemn procession that opens the day, threads into the oval with music and banners. Images of gods travel with it, not to bless killing, but to make killing legible, a performance inside the sacred weather of the city. When the editor mounts the dais and his steward unrolls the program, the crowd learns the pairs and wagers. Then the sand receives its first footfalls, and the wooden swords of the prelude tap like a tuning. Most days end in the living's favor. Death is rarer than the imagination insists. But death is present, salted into every choice, and that is enough to make a crowd lean forward with both hands on their own lives. If you want to feel how the munus peeled away from the funeral and attached itself to public life, look to the law that begins to trace its edges. Sumptuary rules try to cap extravagance. Edicts try to keep elections from drowning in gifts of blood and bread. You don't regulate what doesn't matter. The more often a magistrate staged a munus, the clearer it became that spectacle was a ladder as well as a liturgy. Meanwhile, the craft of fighting learned to teach itself. The ludi gladiator schools begin as compounds with an armed courtyard and a legal office. There's a dormitory smell, oil, iron, wet leather, boiled grains. The lanista, half coach and half broker, can show you a ledger as quickly as he can correct a stance. A recruit swears the harsh oath to be burned, bound, beaten, and killed if the day requires, an oath that frightens outsiders and steadies insiders, because clear terms are a kind of peace. In that courtyard, something like a profession coalesces. A wooden sword in a master's hand is a grammar book. Footwork is declension and conjugation. A shield's angle is syntax. The drill repeats until the body refuses to forget. Wounds learn to close cleaner. Teammates learn to read each other's speed. The crowd learns to recognize excellence. The rite, having become a show, has now become a school, and that school will later become an industry. It is important to say aloud what all this is not. It is not a parade of mindless slaughter. It is not a mercy-free apocalypse. It is instead a culture's theatre of risk set inside promises, contracts, and scores, even if those contracts can be cruel and those scores life-costly. The amphitheatre is where Rome argued with itself in a language it had invented: courage versus calculation, generosity versus ambition, fate versus the tightness of a man's grip on a hilt. By twilight the bench is empty, perfumed oil has mixed with dust. The stewards have collected bets, and someone is sweeping the sand to erase the day's writing. The arena is a notebook that will be written in again tomorrow, and like all notebooks, its earliest pages are crowded with marginal notes, tomb dedications, family names, a vow to be paid in public so that the private dead will not be alone. What began at the grave has learned how to live in the square. The city will never be the same. Politics noticed the crowd. Once it did, everything accelerated. In the late Republic, Rome became a city where ambition needed an audience, and audiences required astonishment. The old funerary duty widened into civic generosity, the munus into a currency that could buy gratitude, votes, or at least a rumor of greatness. On election posters, the promises were written in chalk. In the arena they were written in bodies. A clever addler could maintain streets and festivals without making hearts race. A magnificent addler could drape a forum in banners. stack the day with pairings, and teach 1,000 throats to say his name. Law tried to hold this fever down. Statutes against bribery crept toward spectacle, naming games as suspect gifts. The Senate limited the size of retinues and the number of pairs a private man could field, frightened by the sight of an individual whose generosity could dwarf a year's taxation. Those limits, of course, became goals to breach. If you were born to greatness, why not prove it in grains and steel? Capua, with its famous schools, became a hinge on which the Republic's anxieties swung. There, a ludus could house hundreds in training, prisoners, debtors, and a few men who had signed their names under the Lanista's pen of their own will. To a moralist, the compound was a scandal. To a realist, it was a factory of skill. That tension between shame and efficiency radiated out from Capua and echoed in Senate debates, street jokes, and the quiet calculations of men who knew what a good fighter might fetch. Then a crack ran through the system and showed what was inside. In 73 BCE, a breakout from that very Capuan school, led by a Thracian with a wrestler's balance and a soldier's eye, taught Rome an ugly lesson in the physics of spectacle. Spartacus and his companions used kitchen knives and practice equipment to win their first freedom. Then they proved too nimble for the countryside's sleepy garrisons. The revolt that followed was not a gladiatorial war in any clean sense. It was a migration of the desperate toward the idea of home, but its leaders' arena training readied them for discipline, improvisation, and the ability to perform under pressure as if a crowd were always watching. For 2 years Rome's confidence frayed. Commanders failed, roads became rumors, and towns learned how quickly an audience can become a witness. When the legions finally closed the ring and crushed the revolt's tattered columns, the Republic exhaled through its teeth and decided that the arena was too powerful to be left vague. Schools tightened their security, laws thickened, contracts grew more precise. The boundary between a fighter and a slave, a boundary never clear, was redrawn again with harsher ink. You might assume the revolt would sour the elite on shows. It did not. If anything, it proved how much attention spectacle could command and how necessary it was to own that attention. The age's great men had long understood the stage. Sulla lit Rome with victory feasts as ruthless as his proscriptions. Pompey learned to turn a triumph into architecture. Caesar, ever the dramatist of his own inevitability, understood that games could make policy felt in the bones. He promised, built, loaned, forgave, and staged. When the Senate tried to limit his displays, he made the limits themselves part of the drama. See what I cannot do, and imagine what I would do for you if only they let me. By then the timetable of a day's show had settled into its famous sequence. Dawn smelled of animals and sawdust. Hunters rehearsed their cues beside crews who dressed the floor, pits covered with mats, trapdoors tested, painted scenery moved into place. The morning belonged to the Venatio, the choreographed hunt antelope and boar, then lions and leopards, rarely the exotic monsters that travelers swore they'd seen across the sea. The crowd learned the difference between terror and thrill by the shine of a cat's eye across the distance of a javelin. Midday turned grim. Executions belonged here, when the audience thinned to eat, and those who remained were strangers to pity. Condemned criminals became actors in myths, refitted for justice. A Pasiphae who met her bull, a Dirce dragged a Orpheus who could not charm the trapdoor. It was cruel, and it was calculated. Cruelty obeyed its hour. This partitioning matters, because it shows the arena's rationality. Fear first to wake the senses. Warning at noon, when digestion made men sleepy and harsh. And then, when the city returned from bread to benches, the attraction. Afternoons belonged to pairs. By the late Republic, The crowd had favorite types and argued about matchups like gamblers who knew their odds. Fighters had begun to be costumed into armatory, systems of weapons and armor that defined not only look but tactic. A heavy shield and fish-crested helmet made the murmillo into walking fortitude. A small curved shield and hooked sword made the thrakes into angles and reach. The retiarius had not yet entered, but his ancestor, a lightly armed skirmisher, taught Rome that speed could draw applause as loudly as endurance. In this climate, seating charts become scripture. Senators get their own front row by law, knights their 10 rows behind, guilds and collegia cluster in blocks, women mostly high up, though the rules flow around the reality that aristocratic ladies can also be the Republic's worst gossips. Where you sit says who you are, who you cheer says who you might become. An editor understands that the map of benches is a map of power. Announce a lavish show, and you flatter those who can attend in the most conspicuous seats. Circulate tickets, and you write policy on paper that smells faintly of oil and ink. Economics closes the loop. The lanista has purchased talent on contract, some short, some for a term of years, some life-bound with clauses that treat a person like a chariot. He must feed, house, train, doctor, and equip. Armourers supply helm and mail, leather workers deliver greaves and belts, grain merchants keep the porridge thick enough to build muscle, physicians tend lungs and ribs with a skill sharpened by repetition. The editor pays the lanista pays his people, the city pays with attention, and attention pays the editor with the only coin a politician really needs. Meanwhile, architecture climbs. Wooden stands had groaned under rocketing appetites. Now stone begins to flow. The amphitheatre, at Pompeii elliptical, with its own vomitoria for the crowd to spill in and out, shows how the Republic learned to think in concrete. It is not imperial grandeur yet. It is competent permanence. A city's promise to itself that the next generation will have somewhere to sit. You can still walk the ring aisle cut into the embankment and hear how voices would have braided with the sound of sand being raked between bouts. All this spectacle has an ethic, even if it is an ethic that disturbs. Mercy is possible, but bounded. The editor can grant a reprieve by raising a finger or unfurling a placard. He can also decide that today bravery must be paid in full. The crowd can shout for a life, and their shout has weight, but contract and purse often arbitrate beneath their volume. A good fighter is worth more alive than dead. Even a hostile moralist in the back row understands the arithmetic. Disgust at blood can coexist with the knowledge that the city is a tangle of ledgers, and that on those pages lives may be measured alongside barley and iron nails. You can feel, in late Republic diaries, the double voice. There is the voice that lists duties, courts to attend, clients to greet, a speech to rehearse, and there is the voice that betrays anticipation. So-and-so is putting on games. They say he has imported panthers. A pair of Thracians from Capua have been seen practicing under a Greek master, known for a nasty drill with a wicker shield. Those two voices merge in a city that has learned to metabolize spectacle into civic metabolism. The games are not an interruption to politics. They are one of politics' dialects. When civil war pulls the Republic apart, spectacle follows each contender like a standard. You can watch how a general will celebrate a victory, a distribution to the troops, a banquet for citizens, if possible, a show that will make an old street new with danger contained by stone. Caesar's long shadow falls here too. His promise to build, his practice of forgiveness, his theatricality with calendar and debt, and his willingness to bear the people's gaze as if it were his armor, All of that taught the next generation that rule would require not only law but liturgy. The arena would supply it. And so, as the Republic dies into the Principate, the Munus stands ready to be moral theatre. Augustus will reform how it is scheduled, who may stage it, what it should say about a ruler's care for his people. He will knit it to festivals, fold it into a year's turning, and make of each afternoon a ceremony of imperial competence. But that is a chapter ahead. For now, as late Republican stars fade one by one, all you need to remember is this: by the time an emperor first adjusts his wreath before stepping into his box, Rome has already taught herself how to feel like one city by watching two fighters negotiate courage in public. The day ends the way it began, with work. Armourers unbuckle buckles, scrub sweat and oil from bronze, check straps for wear. The steward settles accounts. The lanista signs receipts with a stylus over a waxed tablet, calculates a bonus for a man who fought beautifully enough to make the crowd sing. Outside, hawkers pack the last of their figs, the last of their memory of a fall of sand that looked for a minute like fate and turned out to be footwork. A child walking home with an older brother mimics a move, shield high, feint low, and laughter replaces the day's hardness. Politics noticed the crowd, so did everyone else. The Republic had learned to bleed to the beat of applause, and no one who would rule Rome thereafter could pretend they hadn't heard it. Stand inside an empty amphitheatre at dawn, and you can hear the machine warming up. Not cogs and pistons, but sandals on wood, hemp lines rasping through pulleys, a mule snorting as it leans into a cart of sand. The arena was never only a ring of fights. It was a living system: administrators, craftsmen, beasts, bankers, cooks, carpenters, undertakers, each part timed to the day's heartbeat. By the time a trumpet pulled the city's attention toward mid-morning light, hundreds of hands had already threaded the spool. Start with the editor, the show's patron and conductor. He is not alone. His steward keeps ledgers with the careful anxiety of a man who knows that generosity wins love, but debts bury careers. A month earlier, these two sat with a wax tablet and built a schedule like a bridge: morning hunts, midday punishments, afternoon pairs, finale, if the crowd needs one more gasp. They signed contracts with a lanista, one of several, because no single school can stock a true festival. They courted the animal contractor whose handwriting looks like claw marks and whose stable masters smell faintly of cedar and fear. They shook hands with rope pullers, trapdoor men, and a painter who can turn rough wood into a forest if you squint from the 14th row. The amphitheatre itself helps them. Architecture is not neutral here. It is a partner. An ellipse pulls focus into its center the way a lens pulls light onto a page. The seating, stacked and stepped, makes a city into a diagram. Senators up front, because law likes to see itself first, knights, officers, and priestly orders just behind. Guilds in blocks with their banners. Ordinary citizens farther up. Families perched in the breeze where cheapness equals altitude. Inscriptions mark stairways, and ushers enforce what inscriptions whisper: you are what you paid to be, at least for the hours between trumpets. Behind and below what eyes can see, the hypogeum breathes. In the largest arenas a cellar runs under the sand, tunnels, cages, staging rooms, posts bristling with iron rings for tethering, ramps that tilt when a lever complains, trapdoors that open like a stage's little miracles. Not every city could afford this underworld, but where it existed, the floor could flower with scenery in a wink. A painted copse slides into view. A door in the sand becomes the mouth of a cave. A cage rises like a bad idea. The crowd loved the surprise, but stagehands loved the cues. A whistle through teeth, a slackening of a line, the thump thump that means now. Sand is not a background, it is a tool. The day before the show, carts deliver new loads, clean, dry, the colour of toast from a riverbank upstream. Workers rake it into level purity, then rake again. Its grain matters too fine and it plumes, blinding too coarse, and it punishes knees and weapons. The right sand swallows blood quickly, muffles footfalls, so you can hear a cheer rise like smoke. In winter it is spread a little deeper, in summer thinner. On days when animals star, it is tamped firm so hooves don't dig and panic. The morning belongs to the Venetians, and their logistics begin long before sunrise. The bestiary is a trade route masquerading as a menagerie. From the Atlas at the empire's western shoulder come lions, sullen in travel crates that took months to arrive. From Numidia and Mauritania, leopards with eyes like coins. From the scrub of Asia Minor, wild boar who have never known offence. Elephants if a patron wants to bankrupt himself, ostriches if he wants to hear children laugh. Crews feed them on the march, and in warehouses near the arena's rear gates, adjusting rations so that hunger incites movement, but does not sharpen cruelty past the point of control. Hunters, the venators, drill in the service yard. Their javelins are weighted for quick lifts and second throws. Their spears, flex by design, tremble when they wound. A few perform the old circus trick with a stick and a cat, parading proximity as if fear were a dance partner rather than an adversary. Stage carpenters dress the floor with brush and faux trunks, tall enough to divide sight lines, but not tall enough to hide a charging boar. Trapdoor teams test the sequence with empty cages, down, pull, up, lock. The sand is raked one more time to erase rehearsal's footprints, because to surprise well you must begin from a clean sheet. While the animal contractors supervise, another bureaucracy moves paper like a current. Tickets, little bone or lead tesserae stamped with a number and a gate, went out days ago through patronage networks. A client of a client receives a seat 2 rows closer to the action and owes a favour that no one will mention until winter. Bakers have triple batches rising in their ovens. Wine cellars have watered amphorae to a degree that keeps the crowd warm, not dangerous. Hawkers rehearse their pitches: figs, pine nuts, bread, olives, sponges dipped in vinegar water to dab the forehead, a cushion rented for a coin to rescue a backside from an afternoon of stone. Security is a system within the system. Gate guards take tickets and suspicion in equal amounts. They know the faces of known trouble and the common tricks. A duplicate tessera, a fake seal, a family of 6 trying to become a family of 4 at the turnstile. Inside, a detail of city troops lounges bored and watchful, spears upright like punctuation marks. Their presence is mostly punctuation, an assurance that emotions will be contained if they boil too high. They also have a quieter task, keeping enemies from arranging accidents near important men in the front rows. By mid-morning, the first trumpet peals the sky, and the pompa arrives. Images of gods, standards, the editor himself, the lanistae, with their men, animal trainers leading the day's non-human actors. It is a procession designed to remind everyone that what will follow is part ritual, part theatre, part inventory. The master of ceremonies reads the edict, whose funeral or festival the day honours, which pairs will fight, which special marvels the editor has promised. A placard might boast imported beasts or an innovative pairing. A rumour might forecast an afternoon finale that will keep neighbours in their seats through the dull cruelty of noon. Then the morning plays out as choreographed hazard. Gates clank. A leopard becomes a moving stripe turned into geometry, by a man with a net and a kithara player's timing. A bear lumbers toward a spike fence and learns it is honest. An ostrich flees in wide loops while javelins describe impatient lines above it. A boar lowers its head and the entire half of the city, raised on farms, leans forward in a single motion, as if they could help. When a beast is dispatched, crews pull it off with hooks and respect, quick to reset. The arena must pace like a story, not a slaughterhouse. Midday's change happens almost mercifully fast. Many stand to find bread and shade, many remain, because morbid fascination has its own gravity. The condemned come in with the resigned and the defiant. Some meet scripted myths, some meet a sword without theatre. The editor hopes that those who stayed will leave to fetch wine after a few sentences of justice. He understands crowd weather the way a sailor understands breeze. The amphitheatre is a bowl for moods. You must pour and decant them in the right order. Behind the stage of sand, the afternoon's machine checks itself. Armourers set helmets in order on racks, like a metal orchard. Shields are inspected for split seams and replaced with spares if a strap murmurs revolt. Weapons are test swung by the doctors, the veteran trainers who can see shared danger in a tiny crack. A surgeon knots his kit, needles, clamps, vinegar, wool, a cautery iron warmed for when cautions fail. He has learned to read wounds as messages. This man needs rest. That man has a trick shoulder. The crowd will never notice if you stop this bout after one clean exchange, but you will save a career. Afternoon's pairs begin with the warm-up, wooden swords and wicker shields in a friendly dance that takes the edge off anxiety as well as muscles. Then the real work. The matchbook is not random. It is a dramaturgy of contrast, heavy against fast hook sword against high crest. The crowd already has favourites, and the editor wants to lay them between uncertainties. A sure winner bores, an impossible upset stuns. The sweet spot is a contest that trembles just enough to make even the gambler forget his arithmetic for a moment, and be simply human again. On good days, everything runs on a current of near misses and practiced recoveries. A net swishes and misses. A trident skids, not punctures. A sword cuts leather, not flesh. A shield smacks a helmet just hard enough to ring, but not cave. On bad days, the chain breaks. An animal refuses to be coaxed. A trapdoor sticks. A pairing misjudges range. A line gets crossed between shame and skill. The system exists to make bad days rare. It cannot make them impossible. All the while, the economy turns like a mill. The Lannister's contract specifies bonuses for especially splendid fights, penalties for no-shows, compensation for injury to valuable men. The editor's steward writes tallies. A city official checks that the number of pairs matches the law. The animal contractor negotiates a discount on a sick lion and hopes no one noticed that the ostrich was imported years ago and is practically a citizen. Even pity participates the crowd's call for mercy. When it rises unanimous and strong, has power because an entire system has quietly agreed that a good fighter is capital that must not be squandered, and a good editor listens. As the sun lowers, another kind of work returns. Undertakers collect what needs collecting. Priests. If the event is bound to a rite, speak the grainy words that make sense of grief inside a city that insists on knowing why every danger happened where it did. Rakes come out again. The machine folds itself like a travelling troupe. By twilight, 2 mules pull a final cart of refuse toward a back gate. In a small office by that gate, the steward seals the day's accounts with a decision he will defend tomorrow. Was the finale worth the extra cost? Can we afford a naval tableau next year? Will anyone remember the ostrich? They will remember more than that. They will remember how everything, stone, rope, sand, steel, paper, law, conspired to make a city feel its own size. The arena is a system, not because it kills well, but because it conducts attention at scale. It teaches 100 trades to synchronize so that for a few hours, strangers hold their breath together. When the machine goes silent and the seats cool, the oval still hums with a kind of after music, the way a harbour hums after ships leave. Tomorrow the carpenters will check the pulleys. Tomorrow the steward will court the baker for a better price on loaves. Tomorrow the lanista will argue that his best man deserves an extra coin because the crowd's roar proved value. The system never sleeps. It only rests between trumpets. The arena's industry needs its artisans, and the gladiator is the finest craft it produces. He does not arrive ready-made. He is shaped by oath, by diet, by drill, by pain carefully managed, and pain carefully risked. If the amphitheatre is a city stage, the ludus, the gladiator school, is its conservatory and factory at once. Begin at the gate. A recruit steps through under a painted sign that promises both training and control. He might be a prisoner of war who has lived long enough to learn new language. He might be condemned by a court and sold to the lanista as an investment. He might be a volunteer, a rarity, but real, who has signed away a term of years in hope of pay, food, and the paradoxical safety of belonging to a disciplined house. The clerk records his name, or gives him a new one, more suitable for posters, crisp, memorable, half mythology and half joke. The body is measured, old scars noted in the ledger, then the moment that makes outsiders shudder and insiders nod, the oath. It is harsh by design. The recruit swears to endure burning, binding, beating, and death, if that is where fate points, a spell of consent that looks like surrender, but feels to those who take it like clarity. Clear terms make fear manageable. Clear penalties make courage measurable. The lanista or his deputy speaks it in a voice that smooths the words, not to soften them, but to polish them into something that fits inside the skull. From now on, this man belongs to the ludus, in the way an apprentice belongs to a shop, a sailor to a ship, a soldier to his century. Ownership is brutal. That brutality is also a fence that keeps randomness out. The layout of a good school is simple. A rectangular yard ringed by barracks, storerooms, a kitchen, and 2 rooms that command respect, the armory and the infirmary. In the yard posts stand like a small forest. They are the palli, the wooden opponents against which a man will carve the grammar of his craft. At first he will hit wood more than he will strike flesh. Wood does not flatter, it teaches. A day's rhythm begins before sunrise. Porridge and bread first, barley more than wheat, beans and vegetables in generous rotation, oil to gloss the calories. Outsiders laugh and call them barley eaters, as if barley were an insult. Inside the compound, the nickname becomes a badge. Barley builds the kind of body that takes blows and doesn't break. Beans feed muscles that have to lift and lunge on command. There is ash in the diet too, lime rich, folded into drink, or food to steady bones, and help the body hold on to its own resilience. The doctor knows why, even if he explains it in the ancient language of humours and heat. Then drill. The doctors, trainers with names the men say with affection and fear, set the order. Footwork first steps that measure distance in thumb widths, pivots that keep the body coiled for second intention. A rhythm in the soles that once learned makes fear seem slow. Shields are lifted till arms tremble, then lowered and lifted again. A good shield becomes a living limb. A bad shield is a mirror of bad habits. Wooden swords, weighted heavier than the real ones, teach wrists to be honest. 2 hours of this, and sweat has washed sleep out of the last corners of the body. Only then does the matching begin. A recruit's build and instinct suggest his path, broad shoulders and a temperament that trusts a shield, perhaps a murmillo with a high-crested helmet and the long rectangular shield that turns a man into a small wall, narrower, quicker, good at feints, a thrakes with the small curved palmula, and a sword with a hooked tip that reaches over the opponent's rim. A man who moves like a fisherman, patient, explosive, obsessed with angles, might be trained as a retiarius, net in one hand, trident in the other, speed for armor, guile for shield. His opposite number, the circuiter, learns to be the steady moon that hunts that flickering tide, smooth helmet that sheds a net's bite, blunt eyes that won't snag, shield tucked like a promise. No one starts with steel. Wicker shields find the failures that wood will not. Blunted edges overwhelm egos that refuse to admit error. The doctors interrupt constantly. Shorter steps, chin down, don't reach. Let him hit your shield, not your chest. Do it again. Praise is rare and therefore food. Punishment is frequent and therefore also food. The lash is a teacher too. Not as often as stories claim, but often enough that the body knows who is in charge when laziness tries its little rebellions. In the intervals between drill and drill, the school knits itself into a society. The kitchen is loud with the politics of appetite. The old veteran who hoards figs and distributes them to favoured novices. The cook who has learned that a little honey on feast days buys loyalty that no contract can write. Baths steam at the day's two ends. Oil is rubbed onto tendons that would otherwise seize like old rope. The infirmary smells of vinegar and wool and galled skin, but it is a place of hope, not simply a place of repair. The doctor has seen the same wound 100 times. He knows which herbs lighten sleep, and which tighten skin. He knows which story eases fear. I have seen worse, and the man who carried it now trains the retiari. Rest is discipline too. A good ludus guards sleep the way a good ship's captain guards a compass. Lanterns are out at a fixed hour. A guard walks the barracks corridor and counts the breaths of men who pretend to be asleep until they are. The body needs rebuilding as much as it needs breaking down. Sometimes the lanista himself walks at dusk, listening to talk. He hears laughter and snoring and muffled anxiety as men murmur their gestures, net toss, shield turn into the air of their shared room. He knows morale is a currency as spendable as cash. Contracts are their own school. The volunteer signs, a term of years, a schedule of pay, a ladder of bonuses for excellence. The enslaved man's contract is signed without him. Its terms live in the lanista's ledger, but he learns what matters by how he is treated and how the trainer explains future. Release is possible. The wooden sword, the rudis, is given to men who have earned freedom by a measure that is part account and part affection. Many free men stay on as trainers, guards or darers who fight occasionally for a fee. The world outside is wide and unstructured. The world inside has meals at known hours, rules and respect that a life in poverty might never give. Discipline is not merely negative. The ludus builds identity the way a legion builds a standard. Names and pairings turn into stories retold at supper until they are songs. Graffiti scratched by bored hands into plastered walls praise heroes of the local sand. Crescens the netman, one from 5 different schools. Nicomachus, loved by girls. Boasts, jokes, mysterious curses directed at future opponents. A fighter learns he is not only fodder for posters, he belongs to a lineage. The old Murmillo, whose walk is a limp and a chuckle, still knows the trick of turning a thrakes' hook. The retiarius with a belly grown soft still throws his net in practice with a flourish that makes children clap. The public exists here too, even behind walls. Scribes bring copies of the editor's edictum, the posted program, so men know when their names will be called. Young boys from the town hover by the gate to beg for a look, to bring news, to exchange errands for a nod from someone they have decided to love. Women with money and courage come sometimes to visit. The school's discipline polices this, sternly in principle, and variably in fact. Stories of love affairs, some sweet, some awful, flicker through the culture, like rumors of comets. The line between fascination and exploitation is thin and often stepped over. On some afternoons the ludus empties into the arena for public practice bouts, wooden weapons, but real speed. The crowd gets accustomed to faces, wagers begin to form. The editor watches like a vintner sampling barrels. He points that pair at the festival next month. This man needs a better opposite. That one hold him back. The scar is raw. The lanista nods and calculates, keep the rising star local, or send him to a bigger city for the kind of ovation that multiplies value. Fear is everywhere, and often invisible. In the barracks before a big show, an old hand will sit with a recruit and teach him the oldest trick, breath steady, eyes soft, jaw unclenched. He will joke about worst outcomes, and then he will not joke. You have done this 100 times in the yard. The trumpet is only a trumpet. Hear me? It's only a trumpet. In the morning he will check his friend's helmet chin strap personally, and smack the breastplate lightly as if blessing it. The ludus is harsh, but inside its hardness is a fraternity that rests on shared knowledge. The only people who truly understand what this costs are those who will pay it with you. The day of a fight. The school becomes a monastery of motion. Helms are carried in cloth to keep polish safe. Shields are stacked like doors. The lanista does his last stern speech. No drink, keep your head, obey the referee. A small shrine in a corner smokes with a quick offering to Hercules, to Nemesis, to Fortune, to the household gods of men who came from far away. Superstition is not extravagance here. It is structure. Ritual turns chaos into a pattern. A mind can step inside without falling. At the arena, uniforms become personae. A murmillo fastens his crest and becomes mass and patience. A thurdex checks the blade's hook and becomes angle and cleverness. A retiarius twirls his net until the shoulder finds its groove and becomes a man with a thundercloud in his hand. They will meet their opposites not as abstractions but as men whose breath smells like the same barley and whose trainers shout the same kinds of truths. The referee, the summa rudis, holds up his wand and looks each in the eye. He is not a judge of poetry. He is a judge of safety and fairness within the limits that the crowd accepts and the contract dictates. When it is over, crowd fallen to silence or risen to a pitch, mercy granted or not, the school's circle closes again. The injured are carried not as burdens but as investments and as friends. The surgeon becomes center, stitch, bind, breathe with the man whose lungs refuse. Say the soft lie that steadies hands so the truth can be survived. The lanista disputes a fee with the editor's steward in a tone that hides how much he cares about the man whose fight earned that money. The men who returned whole sit on their beds in the barracks with towels around their necks and stare at nothing for a long time. Then someone remembers a joke, and laughter lets the day out through a different door. Gradually proficiency becomes reputation, and reputation becomes leverage. A fighter with a dozen victories in pleasing contests can ask for better terms or a fight on a bigger stage. His portrait appears crudely on a wall, executed by a friend with charcoal and oil, helmet bright, eyes like two thoughtful bruises. Children sound his name at hopscotch. A baker names a loaf for him. This is not redemption in any modern sense, but it is recognition in a very old one. The city knows what you have done with your body, and sometimes, astonishingly, freedom arrives. The rudis is placed in a man's hand. He is called by his full name in front of a crowd that has for once agreed about something. He returns to the school, because the school is home, and feasts. He promises to train the young. He promises never to say how fear tastes, except to those who need to know it. Some leave to farm, to keep an inn, to vanish. Some cannot bear the quiet, and return to fight again, paid for a single day's theatre, while bearing no one's brand, but the one inside their own ribs. If you walk past a ludus late on a warm night, you can hear it sleeping, a cough, a murmur, the creak of a bunk, a guard's soft footfall. The moon lays its pale shield over the courtyard posts. The paints in the armory are dull. A trainer's stick leans in a corner and dreams of morning. This is where gladiators are made, not by fate alone, not by cruelty alone, but by a craft that turns fear into a sequence of movements, and turns the sequence into something like art. The city pays to see the finished work. The school pays with time, correction, and 1,000 small mercies that never make it to the posters. Tomorrow, barley and beans. Tomorrow, ash and oil. Tomorrow the old Mamillo will show the young Thrakes again how a shield's rim can be a kind of question that demands a very specific answer. Tomorrow the oath will still be harsh and still be chosen, even by those who did not choose the first step through the gate. Tomorrow they will make gladiators again, one posture, one breath, one bruise at a time, because the arena's machine needs excellence, and excellence is always handcrafted. In the ludus yard, the first thing a recruit learns is not a strike, but a silhouette. Armor is grammar. Every plate and plume a part of speech that tells the crowd who he is before he moves. The amphitheatre is a long way from the tailor's shop, yet it begins where every stage begins, with costume. Not decorative, but declarative. Not merely protective, but persuasive. A gladiator's gear is a compact between craft and theatre. Make the body dangerous, make the danger legible, make the legibility beautiful. The armory smells of vinegar and oil, damp leather and hot breath. Racks divide identity into pieces. Greaves here, manicae there, helmets on pegs like sleeping animals. The armory runs a thumb along an edge and listens. A good workshop is musical. Iron and bronze ring true when they're sound. He tightens a chin strap, taps a rivet, counts dented plates that will need repeening at dusk. Beside him a chest of crests, dyed horsehair, stiff with glue, waits to turn a plain helm into a moving banner. Start with the big shields and the men who carry them. For mass is a kind of argument. The murmillo, broad-shouldered, patient, wears a high-crested helmet, whose face is a grill of barred vision. On his arm the scutum, a door more than a shield, curved to cup him, and the future blows he means to redirect. His sword is short, stabbing, honest, a gladius made for the distance his shield creates. Watch him advance, and you see architecture walking edges, planes, a measured gait that eats ground in thumb-wide bites. His opponent will be lighter, usually, because contrast is drama's oldest trick. Across from mass stands angle. The Thrank's lean cutting carries a small palmula that must be placed, not simply held, and a sicker with a hooked tip that reaches around the mermail's defences. His helmet's crest is lower, and turned like a question, its brow deeper, its plume often dyed as if to advertise quickness. A Thrank's fights on diagonals, and survives on footwork. Show open line, withdraw it, take another, nip and be gone. The crowd learns his grammar in a heartbeat. This one punctuates with commas, not with periods. There are others in the company of contrasts. The hoplomachus wears a round shield and a spear that returns old Greek war to Roman theatre, high greave on the forward leg, small crest that flickers when he faints. The provocator is matched against his own kin, breastplate to breastplate, a mirror duel that values control over spectacle. There are equites who fight on horseback at the day's beginning when the sand is smooth and the horse's hooves won't find treachery. There are dimacheri, paradoxical and elegant, with a blade in each hand and the opposite problem of most fighters, too many options. And then, of course, there is the pairing that turned the arena into a thesis, net and trident against smooth-faced pursuit. The retiarius wears almost nothing, girded loins, a protective shoulder guard, gellerus that climbs the neck like a wave, the left arm wrapped in a manica that glitters when new and looks like snake scales when old. In his right hand the fascina, three-tined and patient, in his left the net that makes a sound like a sigh when it unfurls. Across from him the secutor, the chaser, with a helmet whose eye-holes are small circles that refuse to offer the net anything to catch. His shield is the compromise between wall and paddle, his sword the compromise between chop and stab. Their dance is a statement written in opposition, openness versus enclosure, reach versus rush, guile versus pressure. When the retiarius twitches the net and finds nothing, the crowd inhales. When it collapses over the secutor, like dark weather, the crowd becomes weather itself. All of this is practical before it is poetic. Helmets are weight and breath. The grill that protects the face also cooks it. The metal that guards the skull turns it into a small furnace on summer afternoons. A murmillo learns to listen through the helmet as much as look, the difference between a foot sliding and a foot planting. The click that means a shield is changing angle. The tiny intake of breath just before a feint, the retiarius, barefaced, hears everything but must wear his own skin as armor, trusting distance and deception. Each class teaches humility in a different key. The manica deserves a hymn. It began as linen and leather wrapped in loops and bathed in resins to stiffen, then graduated to plates, iron, bronze, stitched onto that base like scales on a fish. It runs from knuckles to biceps and turns forearm into cudgel. A good manica saves hands, and hands write victories. Beside it on the bench lies the ochria, the greave, paired or single depending on the school's style, laced tight to shave a heartbeat off the time between thought and step. And the skin between plates. On that theatre's blankness, the ancients wrote reassurance. Oil to shine, chalk to dry, the blue of a charm traced by a friend's fingertip, where it won't be seen from the stands, but will be felt under leather. The belt, the cingulum, broad, embossed, sometimes absurdly ornate, is more than decorative. It girds the lower back and reminds a man where his center is. The loincloth, sublegaculum, is tied with a knot that lives in muscle memory. Men can laugh at superstition in the yard. They do not laugh at knots. Smiths who make this gear are half engineers, half poets. Bronze yields to peening and patience. Iron submits to heat and hammer. Ventilation holes in a helmet must be big enough to breathe through, but not so big that a tip can find an eye. The crest socket must take a plume deep enough that it will not fly off at the first shield slam, because a dislodged crest confuses the crowd, and confusion is not the same as surprise. Engravings on a cheek piece, Mars Medusa, a serpent that bites its own tail, are salesmanship, yes, but also sacrament. A man who thinks a god favors him has better footwork for reasons no philosopher can explain. If you line a dozen helmets along a bench, you can read the history of an era in their faces. Republic, simpler, lighter, more soldier than showman. Early empire flourishes grow, crests exaggerate, edges are rolled not only to strengthen but to gleam. Later, as laws try to calm expenses and editors try to outdo each other anyway, compromise returns. Durable fittings, a little less ostentation in bronze, more ingenuity in paint and plume where coin can be stretched. Provincial tastes leave fingerprints. A school in Africa loves deep red plumes that look like wildfire at a sprint. A school in Gaul prefers embossed knotwork that makes a cheek guard into jewelry when the light catches it. Weapons are arguments too, and regulators, referees with eyes like ledgers, enforce the grammar. A seeker may have a wicked hook, but its reach must not creep beyond the standard, lest a Thracian become a scythe. A gladius is standardized in length, so that blades meet honestly at expected distances. The trident's tines are filed to an edge that will cut but not pierce a skull through plate, unless driven by fate and stupidity together. Nets are weighted to unfold with predictability. Too heavy is unfair, too light is farce. Before each bout the summer Rudis inspects, dismisses, approves. He is not a bureaucrat, he is the keeper of a balance that lets the crowd believe what it sees. There are outliers and exotics that visit like comets. The Esidarius, who fights from a small cart in imitation of foreign ways, a reminder that the empire collects not just taxes but techniques. The Andabiter, blind-helmeted, who swings at sound and turns the arena into a cruel experiment in luck. The Sagittarius with bow on foot or horse, rare because arrows flatten drama into geometry, unless used sparingly in scenes of myth or morning hunts. Women fight too, sometimes gladiatresses, armed much like men, their rarity a magnet that pulls rumour and moral outrage both. Reliefs show them with seeker and palmula, hair-bound, bodies muscled, names carved as if to make them safer by making them known. Clothing's language has politics as well as poetry. In the early centuries, Athrax and Hoplomachus weren't merely styles. They were theatre about conquered peoples, Thracian, Greek tamed and disciplined inside Rome's ring. Over time, those ethnic edges blunted. By the High Empire, a Thracian was a set of tools, not a man from the Balkans, yet the echo remained. To put on a helmet was to put on a story about what kind of world the city believed it governed. The ritual of dressing turns men into those stories one buckle at a time. An attendant laces the greave, double-checks the knot, pats the shin once, a quiet blessing. The helmet goes on last for those who wear one before that moment faces are human, flushed, resolute. After it, they are archetypes with eye holes. Noise dulls, smell changes, air through bronze is different, metallic, a taste as much as a scent. Someone jokes too loudly. Someone nods toward a small household god on a shelf by the door. The lanista watches, says nothing, and then he says the one sentence that will be remembered all day. Keep your feet, you win with your feet. The rest is detail. The armory's day has deadlines. After a fight, gear returns not to racks, but to triage. The manica with a torn stitch is prioritized. A helmet with a bent grill is heated and coaxed. Leather is wiped down with vinegar to persuade blood not to live there. Pumice stones polish edges back from bird to honest. Linen liners are taken to the women who mend with a speed that looks like sorcery. An inventory scroll lives on the armorer's table, crowded with ink, this shield retired, this one re-rimmed, this crest gifted to a man whose bout brought the house up as if by a single string. Posters, painted boards, chalked walls, translate all of this to the city. Marcus of the Golden School, versus Callistratos the Thracian. Little drawings help the illiterate see what the words mean. A net and trident, a small curving sword, a big rectangular shield, a plume like a red flame. In taverns, men play with counters and argue about matchups. The retiarius will find that Secutor's sure, the Murmillo's shield is too tall. The Thrakes has better feet. They are talking about bodies, yes, but they are also talking about gear, because in this world kit is destiny shaped to order. Even in death, the costume's grammar persists. A fallen fighter's helmet removed becomes revelation. A face, suddenly just a face. Sweat track pale through dust. Eyes blinking at a sky that has gone very far away. If mercy is granted, the helmet goes back on to escort him off stage as the character he was. If not, the gear passes to hands that will clean it, mend it, and put it on another man who will inhabit the same role but not the same story. The city keeps its archetypes. The school keeps its ledgers. Men keep whatever courage the gear taught them to build. There is a gentler end to the costume's life. When the rudis, the wooden sword of freedom, is placed in a veteran's hand, sometimes the school gifts him a crest or a cheek guard engraved with his bouts, a portable museum of pain and applause. He hangs it near his hearth, and children visiting his tavern touch it as if it were a door handle to a different weather. He will tap it when he tells stories, some true, some improved by time, and he will say what all artisans eventually say about their tools. They taught me as much as I taught them. So when the trumpet calls and two figures step into the sun, the crowd reads them instantly by their silhouettes. The Murmillo's wall, the Thrags' angled question, the Retiarius' open hazard, the Secutor's sealed intent. Armor has already told the first chapter. Blades and breath will write the rest. In that instant before movement, costume has done what good costume always does. It has turned bodies into meanings and reminded a city why it came, to see courage shaped, not only shown. Warehouses near the amphitheatre become an ark with rules. Feeding charts are hung with the same sternness as a legion's duty roster. A lion is fed enough to move, but not enough to nap through drama. Water is rationed to control timing. Trainers whistle the way sailors whistle to teach rhythm in, out, left, halt. No one believes a lion obeys. Everyone believes a pattern can coexist with its contempt. On show day, handlers smear scents on fake brush, blood, musk, so that the animals' noses tell them a story that keeps them moving across sight lines instead of sulking in a corner that only the unlucky can see. Begin with the Venationers, the hunts. Their paperwork starts months before the first trumpet. Merchants write from ports, with letters that smell like salt and camel. Lions from Mauritania, two females proven to travel well, leopards from Numidia, light eaters, but manageable. A rhino if you want to bankrupt your grandchildren, ostriches that will make children shout and elders smile despite themselves. Wolves from mountain forests, wild boar from Asia Minor, a bear from the Alps who hates ropes with a philosophy. The best Eri and Venationers hunters trained for the ring have their preferences and their prejudices. A leopard is a puzzle. A boar is a deadline. A bear is a negotiation you cannot afford to lose. If afternoon belongs to pears and to the craft of men, morning and the great festivals belong to the world tamed and untamed, fur and feather and flood, flame and smoke and the human appetite for astonishment. Rome did not merely stage fights, it staged the empire itself, deserts that breathed, forests that fit inside a ring, seas that rose where yesterday there was dust, and fire that behaved like a dancer when told. The floor, dressed like a small desert or a good lie of forest, gives choices without giving shelter. A copse built from painted trunks breaks the view into panels for javelins to curve through. A crescent of fence keeps a bear's first panic from turning into a wall crash. Pits with hinged lids wait to swallow a moment and give it back later as surprise. The trapdoor crew moves to cues like carpenters in a miracle play. Now the cage rises, now the bush becomes a door, now the empty sand becomes the mouth of a cave. Timing is everything. Surprise that arrives a heartbeat too late is irritation. Surprise that arrives on the beat is magic. Hunters enter with their own costumes, short tunics, greaves that forgive stumbles, arm guards that invite teeth to choose leather instead of bone. They carry spears balanced for a second throw, javelins with straps to add range, sometimes a noose on a pole for a moment of comedy and genuine skill. A famous venator can read a boar's shoulders the way a good swordsman reads a wrist. Here it comes, here it faints, here is the half-breath where a step buys a life. They are showmen and pragmatists. They bow when a throw is beautiful, and shout to a stagehand when a gate sticks. Their dignity is in the space they make for both. The crowd's responses are layered. Children laugh at ostriches who run like ink scribbles. Farmers lean forward at a boar's first sideways feint. They know already how dangerous that motion is. Everyone hushes at a lion's low sound, clipped into the sand like a sentence that makes no concessions to human grammar. Above it all, politics hums. The morning hunts are empire turned into inventory. Rome can import terror and turn it into choreography. A leopard's spots can be counted, which means a province can be taxed, which means a god has been pleased by order. When water takes the sand, astonishment changes key. No spectacle says, "We command nature," like a sea conjured inland. The great Naumachia, Julius Caesar's basin near the Tiber, Augustus's lake, Claudius's grand folly at Fucine were not afternoons but seasons. Earth was moved, embankments raised, water led in by channels that had to be cunning enough to fill on cue and humble enough to drain quickly, so rot and sickness would not take their own bow. Ships were built shallow and tough. Prisoners were trained to row and to die on schedule. The city gaped from banks and bleachers and temporary scaffolds, while fleets reenacted ancestral victories or invented them with just enough fidelity to flatter memory. But mornings hold cruelty without performance too. The phrase ad bestias is a clerk's shorthand and a city's euphemism. The condemned bandits, rebels, those the law and custom agree must be broken publicly, enter without armor or script. Sometimes the killing is direct, sometimes it is draped in myth, because theatre can turn punishment into instruction with more grace than a proclamation pinned to a door. Dis tied to a bull, Orpheus torn when his song fails to wake restraint in anything but people. A man made Icarus and burned when his wax refuses to obey metaphor. Later centuries remember Christians here. Earlier centuries remember others. The morning sun has shadows regardless of century. Imagine the noise. Drums on decks beat a pace that defies the heart. Oars slap. Bronze rams cut foam that was yesterday dust the audience becomes a cliff face of voices. Standards dip. Painted gods glare from prow carvings. A slave in a high perch rings a bell when a feigned accident becomes a real one, and men go into water armored and do not come out. The emperor watches, jaw set in a line that can be read as benevolence or arithmetic. Bread is distributed, coins are flung. The city says thank you in the only way it knows. Sound. Closer to the amphitheater core, smaller floods become display more than war. Whether the Flavian amphitheater in its earliest days truly flooded deep enough for boats is an argument the city will have for as long as it has stones. What all agree on is this: water played its part. Shallow stagings of sea scenes with seals and trained swimmers, fountains that made Neptune smile from scaffolds, quick stagings of the myth where a hero must swim, and a stagehand with a rope becomes a river current on command. Later, when the hypogeum made permanent machinery beneath the floor, water retreated to painted suggestion and clever plumbing, enough to cool, enough to gloss, enough to let the city feel a kiss of sea without risking its own fruitwood and pine. Fire is water's impatient sibling. The amphitheatre courts it and fears it in equal parts. Torches and pitchlight morning hunts in seasons when the sun arrives late. Dancers with flares trace arcs that write runes in smoke between bouts. Acrobats balance bowls that spill flame the way a singer spills notes. Safety is a choreography all its own, sand where sparks fall, buckets stationed like arguments along corridors, a team of vigils, the city's firemen paid extra to watch the rafters when torch jugglers are hired. There is a darker fire that belongs more to the law than to the stage. The tunica molesta, a shirt soaked in resin, turns a man into a torch, usually as the last act of a myth about hubris, or the first act of a message about order. It is as ugly as it sounds. Even the crowd that comes to be moved by extremes falls quiet in a way that feels like a shiver under the skin. Editors learn the weather of these moods. Too much fire and a morning becomes mean too little, and the promise of wonder goes unkept. The engineering behind all this wonder is the city's true boast. Sluices fastened with bronze that won't seize even when grit intrudes. Trapdoors that close so flush a child walking the sand would never know what waits beneath. Capstans and winches bribed with grease and curses to lift cages so smoothly that a panther seems to rise on its own will. Scenery that collapses elegantly into carts and can survive being trundled through alleys to a storage yard where tomorrow's sunlight will show which paint cracked and which joint kept its secret. Even smell is engineered. Incense burned at the entrances to mutter against the musk of fear and the honest stink of crowds. Laurel hung because victory should have a scent even before it occurs. Citrus runs crushed in water basins to freshen sponges sold by hawkers who shout the virtues of wet cloth in August as if it were philosophy. The city knows that spectacle must court all the senses, or it feels thin and mean. There are stories the morning leaves behind like footprints. A famous hunter who could hush a bear with a raised palm and a tone that sounded like a lullaby. An ostrich that leapt a barrier and ran the circumference of the arena, while 1,000 people laughed as one until a gate opened at the right moment to invite it out and home. A crocodile lifted from the Nile and paraded through a provincial amphitheatre to teach a town that maps are real. The handler, more courage than wisdom, rested an elbow on the animal's back, as if leaning on a counter, while the crowd decided it liked geography. A panther that refused every cue until a girl in the upper seats sang a hymn, at which point it lay down as if in prayer. No one can prove the song mattered. Everyone who was there will tell you it did. Editors are judged by mornings as well as afternoons. An elegant pairing of heavy and light can salvage a clumsy boar that runs himself headfirst into a fence and sulks there. A clever bit of stagecraft, a sudden forest, a cave mouth, a hunter who slips and recovers with a roll that is part skill and part grace, can turn a cheap animal into an expensive laugh. Conversely, a morning that is only killing without choreography sours wine and makes the crowd mean for the wrong reasons. The best editors know begin with wonder, spend cruelty sparingly, give the city something to talk about that is not a scream. Economics swims under all this. Beasts are capital on hooves. A lion costs more than a season's worth of javelins. A rhino is a mortgage with a horn. Elephants are a rumor that can ruin a man if they die en route. Water is cheap to pour and dear to remove. The drainage channels must be kept clear by men who never get their names chalked on a wall. Fire is the cheapest trick and the costliest mistake. The editor's steward keeps a small notebook of worth it and never again. It is updated in pencil, not ink. Water and fire sometimes meet on purpose. A ship set alight in a basin as a closing flourish when a mock naval battle is done. It burns while it sinks, flame licking at water with a persistence that feels like myth and chemistry shaking hands. The vigils stand ready. The crowd stands too drawn toward the paradox. When the last flame hisses out, there is a breath, and the day can move on to bread and home. Ethics, too, keeps pace. Even in a world that accepts the arena as a given, choices have textures. A boar that fights until exhausted and is taken cleanly with a well-placed thrust earns applause that sounds like respect. A bear that is tormented for laughs earns something colder, a murmur that spreads through rows like a draft under a door. The bestiary know this. They are not merciful. Mercy is a word with meanings too complicated to fit on the morning schedule, but they are professional, and professionalism is a form of moral weather. Afternoon will bring pairs, men and meanings in metal. But remember that mornings, the sea days, the fire intervals, prepared the crowd's senses for that finer craft. A city does not go from sleep to moral subtlety in one trumpet. It wakes first to display, "Here is the world, look what we can bring you." Then it is ready to watch two figures create meaning out of distance and courage. The editor knows this order. The lanista knows it. The child with sticky hands and eyes that will not blink knows it most honestly of all. By noon the sand is a palimpsest. Animal tracks cross and recross paw prints like stars, cloven crescents, the heavy punctuation of elephant pads. If a city has been extravagant, blood has darkened in patches that crews cover with smart shuffles of clean sand. The smell is layered straw, leather, musk, oranges, pitch. The sun concludes its arc toward punishing, and the amphitheater feels like a kiln opening. People stand, stretch, find shade in corridors where stone radiates yesterday's cool. Hawkers switch from nuts to cut melon, from wine to water with a squeeze of sour that makes it safer. Somewhere down in the service ways a mule stamps a hoof and starts a small argument with a handler who will later swear the animal laughed at him. Beasts, water, fire, raw elements turned into chorus. In the great catalogue of Roman boasts, this is the one the amphitheater makes most convincingly. We can take what terrifies you and put it in a ring where it can be seen and survived. That promise is intoxicating. It is also honest about its limits. Sometimes the boar chooses a new line, sometimes water finds a crack, sometimes fire remembers it has no master. On those days the city remembers too that awe and risk are siblings, and that spectacle is never simply a story told to the crowd. It is a story the crowd agrees to enter with its whole body, eyes, ears, breath held, and that is why when the last trumpet fades, nobody speaks for a moment. The senses must climb back down. As evening comes and the last flames are doused and the last sluice is shut, the amphitheater exhales, the beasts are counted and fed or skinned and tallied. The handlers sit on crates and compare scars like scholars comparing texts. The vigils coil ropes. A trainer from the ludus walks the edge of the sand and thinks about feet. Always about feet. Tomorrow his men will need to find their way among all these footprints, as if they were writing on a clean page. He knows the page is never clean. He will teach them to read what morning left and to write a different sentence over it anyway. The arena is a mirror, and coin is the hand that tilts it. You can tell who paid by how the light falls. A cheap morning looks like thrift, two boars and a nervous bear. A lavish afternoon looks like policy, silk awnings, imported leopards, and a program that reads more like a manifesto than a schedule. Rome calls it munus, duty, but everyone hears the second meaning, gift. Gifts expect gratitude, and gratitude is a vote held in the chest. The man who underwrites a day is the editor. Sometimes he is an ambitious edidile with elections on the horizon, sometimes a praetor or consul celebrating office, sometimes an emperor measuring the temperature of the city the way a physician reads a pulse. Occasionally he is a private citizen fulfilling a promise at a funeral, ancestral munera, born from the obligation to honour the dead, yet even grief buys applause when grief provides bread. The editor's steward goes first, ledger under arm, to the ludus to speak with the lanista. How many pairs? What styles? Which stars can be pried loose with extra coin or flattery? The talk is polite, then mathematical, then blunt. Names become numbers, and numbers become promises painted on walls. Every cost has a shadow cost. A pair of famed fighters is not only their fee, it is physicians on standby, a reserve pair in case fate meddles, an honorarium for the referee, a purse for the losers' families should the day turn final. Animals are prices with legs, lions counted in hundreds of denarii, elephants in rumours that float above gold, ostriches in laughter cheaper than meat, but dearer than a javelin. Scenery is carpentry and sweat, paint and pulley, but also storage rents and the city official who must be bribed to ignore that 2 streets are blocked by carts until dusk. Even the awning is a contract with rope makers, sailors to man the rig, and the right season's winds. Editors are shopping not just for spectacle, but for placement on Rome's invisible map of favours. Give the crowd a triumphant retiarius, and you flatter the plebs who love cleverness. Give the equestrian order the tidy mirror duels of provocator, and you flatter men who like rules that reassure. Drag a fleet into a basin, and you flatter memory itself. He remembers Actium, the posters will imply, even if nobody writes the word. An emperor learns which neighbourhoods cheer loudest for which pairings and reads politics from the sound. Adulis learned that a cheaper morning can be forgiven if the afternoon's headliner is a fighter with a chantable name. Law keeps pace with desire, like a stern uncle who loves his unruly nephew and will not admit it. The Republic wrote almost nothing about the amphitheatre because the amphitheatre wrote itself in dust and canvas, here today and rolled up tomorrow. The Empire, which loved permanence, loved regulation. Augustus arrayed citizens in tiers, senators close, equities next, the plebs arranged by tribe, women up high or in separate sections depending on fashion and decree, boys with their teachers, soldiers in clusters with eyes that learn lessons nobody says aloud. Tickets, tesserae, become pebbles of order, a gate number, a wedge of seats, a line that becomes a habit. Sumptuary laws nip at extravagance and then look the other way when emperors ignore them. After a scandalous editor bankrupts a city treasury on ostriches and elephants, a decree caps costs. Then at the next emperor's birthday, the cap is quietly bent. There are rules about how many days a festival may run, and how many pairs an afternoon can consume before mercy must be offered as a staged virtue. And yet, when drought or conspiracy has soured a year, exceptions bloom. A city that has sighed too long is a tinderbox. Spectacle is a controlled burn. More severe laws bind the people who fight. To step into a ludus as a free man is to speak a formula that changes your skin. The auctoratus, the volunteer, swears an oath to endure fire, chains, and the sword, to be beaten, burned, or killed if the contract demands. To obey the lanista as a soldier obeys a centurion, Paper is iron with ink. The law labels the fighter infamous, disreputable, along with actors, prostitutes, and others who make a living from bodies and eyes. Infamia blurs rights. You cannot hold office, cannot accuse a respectable man in court, cannot inherit without permission that must be written like a favour. Yet in the same city, a fighter can be a wall painting, a song, a sweetheart's curse, a name scratched in a ring. Law says one thing, crowds say another. A life is lived between. Contracts knit the business. The Lanista leases pairs to an editor for specific dates with clauses that read like superstition turned into grammar. If a star falls ill, a substitute of equal fame must be provided. If an animal shipment is delayed by weather, the editor may convert a mourning to a comedy of hunters. If a champion dies in training, half his fee passes to his heirs. A bond secures the appearance. Shorties in neighbouring towns keep everyone honest. Reputations are capital. A Lanista who fails to deliver loses next year, not just tomorrow. Doctors Medici Gladiari are line items and miracles. They learn a man the way a carpenter learns a house. His knee that swells after 3 bouts, the rib that protests cold mornings, the shoulder that slips and must be coaxed back without tearing the cord that makes a sword an extension of a thought. Their work is pragmatic theology. Keep breath in chests, so that contracts can be honoured and legends can accrue. They stitch, cauterize, drain, set, bind. They are paid extra to lie sometimes, fit to fight and paid in gratitude to tell the truth, when a brave man needs saving from bravery. Death, too, has bookkeeping. A fighter killed in the arena earns a burial at school expense. His gear stays with the ludus, unless his contract or the editor's generosity sends a helm or crest home to a widow to hang above a hearth like a shield above a door. If the crowd demanded death and the editor granted it, the editor's steward sets aside a purse for the dead man's family. It is smaller than a champion's bonus, but not small enough to be an insult. Stones are carved, Valerius, Thrakes, 22 fights, 9 crowns, beloved. A small relief shows the palmula and the seeker, so the passerby can read even if words mean little. Politics, like water, finds every crack. Rival editors purchase mornings that feel like replies to each other. One touts discipline and order, the next advertises abundance and novelty. A governor in a provincial capital announces a day to celebrate a new aqueduct. He stages a mock sea and teaches his city the price of water by showing what it can do. An emperor, anxious after a famine, throws open the amphitheatre and distributes bread with a smile that says, "I heard you." Another emperor, anxious for different reasons, bans swords in the streets and increases amphitheatre days, because people who shout habit in the afternoon are sometimes quieter at night. The law also tries to discipline the editor's pride. There are decrees that bar private citizens from holding games without permission, others that force editors to publish budgets beforehand, still others that declare certain punishments off limits except by imperial order. These are broken as often as they are kept. The city tolerates this because the city enjoys being courted. Ergotism, public generosity as private advertisement, turns streets into ledgers, a portico with a donor's name, a bath with a donor's statue, an amphitheatre morning with a donor's face in the program. "I gave you lions" is a sentence that spends easily in the forum. Beneath all this theatre is labour that seldom gets a name, quarrymen who cut the stone that makes the seating, sailors who haul beasts across straits while whispering to them in bad weather, scribes who copy the program a dozen times in a dozen hands, boys who run messages from ludus to editor and back with legs that can outpace a rumour. Bakers get up earlier on show days. Laundresses curse blood with recipes their grandmothers taught them. The vigils inspect ropes and exit staircases, because one panic can turn gift into liability. The law binds them too, guild rules, permits, fines for broken torches and blocked alleyways. The city is nothing if not a web of duties wrapped in explanation. Ambition flips coins into this web and tugs. A young aedile with a lean purse must choose 2 afternoons with middling pears, or 1 afternoon with a headliner and a morning sweetened by giraffes nobody in this city has ever seen. His steward argues for certainty. His heart argues for sensation. He chooses the latter. The giraffes arrive with eyelashes like rumours and legs like jokes. Children will speak of them for years. The headliner wins a fight that seems unwinnable in the 4th exchange by doing something only he can do with his feet. The crowd roars a word that sounds like a promise. Election day notices. Then there is mercy, and how coin buys it or refuses to. The outcome of a bout is not written, but the script has scaffolding. If an editor orders brutality too often, he buys a reputation for cruelty that can curdle applause into a hush even when the sun is pleasant. If he orders mercy too frequently, he buys boredom. A crowd will forgive poetry only if the poem has teeth. The best editors listen. They let the summer rudis, the referee, run the bout inside the rules of distance and advantage, and they keep their thumb inside their fist until the crowd has told them how to spend it. Law says the editor decides. Custom says he consults the city that will remember. Manumission is a line in a ledger with a flourish. The rudis, the wooden sword, is a cost. There are ceremonies, gifts, perhaps a small stipend to see a veteran through his first unarmoured month, but it is also an investment in narrative. A freed fighter who opens a tavern called the Net and Trident on a street that smells of olive and ash is a walking advertisement for the editor who granted him freedom. His crest over the door catches light. Children stare, their fathers tell the story again, the version in which the editor's mercy was perfectly timed, and the city's judgment was perfectly wise. Everyone wins, including the truth, which sits somewhere in the middle and smiles. Posterity keeps accounts too. Emperors who rule well can afford fewer games. Emperors who rule poorly cannot afford to stop. Decrees rise and fall like awnings. Today a cap on expenses. Tomorrow an exemption for a feast day. Next week a ban on certain duellings. Then a grand exception to mark a victory nobody saw. The arena teaches Rome how Rome wants to be seen. Money, law, and blood make a triangle. The crowd is the 4th point, and the shape only holds when all 4 agree for an afternoon, for a reign for as long as memory keeps the ticket stub in a drawer. At sundown the steward counts what remains, a chest lighter by a fortune, a city heavier by a story, contracts fulfilled or extended, a physician asleep on a stool with blood under his nails. A lanista already negotiating next month's afternoon in a neighbouring town whose forum stones are newer, whose appetite is naive. Another ledger opens, another mirror tilts. Tomorrow someone will read in the dust what was written in coin today and argue whether it was wisdom or theatre. Rome prefers that the answer be both. The amphitheatre is a machine for making sound. Before the first trumpet, it is already humming. Sandals on stone. Sellers' cries braided into refrain. The boom of a drum, the tubicen tests, because it takes the measure of the morning. Voices fall into their allotted circles as bodies do. Senators on cushions near the sand, equits behind like a clean line in writing. The plebs stacked in wedges that climb toward sky. Soldiers in blocks whose discipline relaxes by degrees. Women gathered where custom says, lovers of the famous scattered like seeds, the poor everywhere because everywhere is theirs. Above it all the awning moves like a chest that breathes. Tickets, small bits of bone or wood, officiate this arrangement, a gate letter, a staircase number, a cuneus wedge carved on a face that will be kept in a pocket long after the day is over. Ushers, locari are part police, part priests of order. They sort confusion into habit and foul mouths into laughter. Stragglers arrive late because bread turned them into errands. Dignitaries arrive louder than they need to. Boys arrive running. Old veterans arrive with a cane and a private smile that says, I have done more ridiculous things on hotter days than this. Once seated, the city begins its second job, commentary. The language of a crowd is half words, half hands. Mitte, send him away, travels like a breeze. Igula, cut his throat, drops like a stone so heavy the sand can feel it. There is whistling for delays, clapping in unison to demand speed, a rolling oh for a near fall, high laughter that belongs to ostriches and clowns, low laughter that belongs to men who have seen too much and will see more. Chants weld syllables into drums. Felix, Felix, as a favourite warms up with strokes that audiences can feel in their own wrists. Albinus carried on a beat that makes his name a commandment. Graffiti is pre-voice. Days before the show, a wall near the baths starts to bloom. Crescens the secutor wins. 10 wins to Pudens. Thraex for the people. Little scratched helmets and shields help the words along. Rival fans answer in chalk. Insults accrete. A wager or two is nailed under the paint by hands that love risk in measured quantities. After the show, the wall becomes a scorecard. Tomorrow it will be a petition. The day after a love poem. Rome is comfortable with palimpsests. Merchants write their own gloss. Peanuts, nuces click into hands like punctuation. Vinegar water in cups with a sprig of mint makes the afternoon civilized. Sausages write their own line in the air, and no senator complains because he remembers growing up hungry. Boys with trays offer ribbons in a champion's color, cheap laurel, trinkets shaped like tridents or curved swords. A mother bargains for a net on a string for her child, then snorts at the price and buys one anyway, because memory argues louder than thrift when children are involved. The editor enters to a scale of attention that is a kind of vote. A polite cheer says, "We will see." A roar says, "You have us already." An awkward hush says, "You spent unwisely last time." He walks a measured path, salutes with a hand that belongs to everyone for a moment, finds his seat where eyes can find him. For the rest of the day, he is a conductor of moods. He does not start the music, but he raises and lowers a baton the crowd cannot see. The first bouts begin. The Summa Rudis holds a staff and a boundary at once. He is a referee, yes, but he is also a translator between styles, adjusting the pace so that distance becomes readable to those in the upper seats. If a murmur becomes a mutter too long, he accelerates a restart. If a dance becomes so clever it strands understanding, he encourages stillness for a breath so the city can catch up. He will later signal the editor, but now he signals the crowd. Attend here, this is important. Music stitches reactions into a tapestry. Trumpets announce entrances. Drums fill spaces where eyes must travel long. Flutes and a chorus lend myth to morning pageants. A cupped hand organ, the hydraulis, makes a sound that seems to belong to water and brass at once. Between bouts musicians tilt mood like a board under sand, up a finger width to excitement, down a finger width to calm. Sound makes edges on feeling so that the editor can count them. Noise is not merely accompaniment, it is power. The amphitheatre taught emperors to read before it taught them to rule. A wise ruler listens for the difference between pearl laughter, rare and expensive, and gravel laughter, cheap and dangerous. He learns the taste of a cheer that rises, because generosity fell from the podium, versus the taste of a cheer that rises because a man below did something impossible, and everyone saw it. Councils are held later based on this. The empire turns on subtler hinges than laws on applause and its vowels. The thumb is a theatre within a theatre. What does it mean? The city argues even as it acts. Some press thumb up and call that death because the weapon rises. Others press it down, hiding steel, and call that mercy. Some invert both. What is constant is the conversation between crowd and editor. Between the summer Rudis's plain facts, was the bout fairly fought? Did the man yield properly? And the city's needs that day. The fighter offers his sword or his throat with a practiced stillness, because stillness is how a body makes room for another's decision without breaking. If mercy is granted, the released exhale is prayer without a God's name. If death is ordered, there is a ritual to keep courage from dissolving into cruelty. A clean thrust averted faces in the first row, a cloak to make the last movements private. Even those who shouted igugula expect decorum. Spectators are not merely consumers, they are co-authors. When a pair invents a rhythm that belongs only to them, the crowd protects it from being cut short. Let them finish is an argument with time itself, and sometimes time yields. If a fighter shows exceptional skill in defeat, the cry missio release collects itself from a dozen throats until it becomes a single voice with 1,000 mouths. A canny editor lets himself be persuaded so that the crowd can own its mercy. Tomorrow graffiti will say, "You saved Spiculus," as if the reader held the thumb alone. Occasionally the crowd breaks its own script. At Pompeii in Nero's day, a rivalry with visitors from Nuceria becomes a riot. Benches ripped up, stones thrown, blood in the corridors where blood is not supposed to be. The emperor closes the amphitheatre for 10 years because when a city forgets how to behave inside a ring, it must be punished outside it. Rome never fully trusts crowds again, but Rome cannot do without them. The machine needs its fuel. There is also private theatre in public spaces. A girl with a trident charm around her neck whispers a prayer for a certain Ritiarius as if the god of nets cared for individuals. A baker who backed a murmillo with half a month's profit clutches the bench so hard it leaves a dent in his palm long after the bout. He will tell his wife he never doubted. Old women who have seen 5 emperors watch with a gaze that is less merciful and more exacting. They clap for timing, not for blood. A soldier home on leave yells advice he barely understands, and later writes a letter in which he remembers himself braver than he was. Superstition travels the steps like a cat. Gladiator sweat sold as medicine in whispers. A lock of a champion's hair tied inside a locket. Red cords against the evil eye. Small offerings made at the threshold to a statue of Nemesis, because hubris is always accused here and you do not want your own day in court. The city believes contradicting things and is comfortable believing them simultaneously. A rational man buys a charm for his child because love argues for insurance. Security is choreography. The vigils watch the staircases where panic begins. Doors are propped. Ushers know which arguments require jokes and which require escorts. The upper levels are restless. Vendors moving, children wriggling, a breeze that, when it rises under the awning, makes the whole structure breathe and the crowd with it. From up there the sand looks like a small country. People say they can tell when a man is finished from the way his shadow falls 3 seconds earlier than his knees, but that is poetry talking. Truth is in posture, and the summer rude is his hand. When the sun leans west, and the big pair comes, silence is not absence of sound, but attention's shape. Tens of thousands can make a quiet so complex you could score it. Paper crisp, where senators sit, wind loud near the awning ropes, child size in the upper benches, drum echo long enough to set the next footsteps. The fighters salute, the music falls back. For a few exchanges the city does not speak. Then, as understanding blooms, ah, this one is drawing angles, that one is shrinking ground. The comments organize into instruction. Watch the left. He wants the leg. The crowd, smarter than any one mind, becomes a coach that the editor cannot buy. Betting tugs at this, in small ways. Side wagers run in whispers or shouts, depending on who owes whom. A noble trades a coin with a merchant, and both grin, pleased by the indecency of equality money can briefly create. A thief works the stairs, a pickpocket works the rail. Both are judged leniently, if the day is good. On a bad day, tempers seek culprits, and find them. Then comes the thumb again, and the editor's face on every face. How he holds that small decision is theatre at its most efficient. A man's life, a city's mood, a donor's reputation, written in the space of a gesture. He may draw it out, hand hovering, eyes to the first ranks, then to the last rows, then to the summa rudes, or he may be swift mercy like a habit that pleases itself. He may defy the crowd to remind it that he rules. He may obey the crowd to remind it that it is his partner. Both messages, if repeated too often, sour. Good editors vary their sentences. After the decision, sound absolves or insists. If mercy, a surge that feels like relief after fever. If death, a tight cheer that tastes of iron. Some cover their eyes and then peek through fingers. Some watch without blinking to prove something to themselves. Children ask questions. Bodies in love can only half answer. Old men tell stories that become, with repetition, true. When it's over, the city pours itself down staircases like sand going home to gravity. The arena smells of oranges and sweat, iron and rope. Graffiti gains new lines. A hawker counts the coins he will spend on lamp oil. A woman folds the ribbon that has touched a champion's wrist and tucks it in her sleeve. She will sew it in later because luck should be stitched, not stored. The editor leaves last or not at all. Sometimes he walks the sand, scuffing it with a shoe as if reading what was written there. He nods to the simmer rudies, to the lanista, to the medic with dried blood on his hands. He hears echoes of his own name, and also that other name the crowd made bigger than its man today. He measures, he thinks about tomorrow. At home that night, Rome keeps talking. Taverns perform exegesis on feints. Baths host reenactments of footwork on wet tile that leads to laughter and a bruise and more laughter. Boys practice with sticks and turn every threshold into an entrance. The city that shouted becomes the city that hums because throats are tired and minds are busy. Somewhere a fighter in a dark cell listens to the muffled echo and learns the rhythm of a crowd he will soon hear full-throated. He breathes in time with it. He sleeps or fails to. The amphitheatre rests like a lung in the night. In dreams the thumb hovers always, its motion undecided, its meaning argued by scholars yet clear to anyone who has ever wanted or feared mercy. Crowd, voice, thumb, three parts of a living creature that Rome feeds because Rome is fed by it. Tomorrow it will wake again, and the city will climb its ribs, and together they will remember how to be one thing for an afternoon. That is spectacle's final secret. It teaches a crowd to share a heartbeat. That is why, long after the sand has been raked flat, and the posters have peeled, people still tell stories that begin with "I was there when." A fighter's first weapon is not iron, it is breakfast. In the Ludus the day begins with heat already on the stones, and a smell that could be a farmyard, if not for the clang of bronze and the steam of oil. A pot thickens over coals. Barley and beans become a paste that holds a wooden spoon upright. The nickname sticks to the men who eat it. Horderi barley eaters, as if mockery could salt a porridge. They swallow anyway, because ridicule cannot deflect a blade, but flesh can. Barley is ballast, slow sugars that keep a body steady between whistles and under a helmet's weight. Beans and lentils add the hum behind the music. Protein enough to mend 1,000 tears you cannot see. A handful of leeks, some garlic, a splash of olive oil that shines like certainty. Fruit. When the season is kind, figs that taste of childhood harvests, dates that remember deserts, salt. Always, because sweat is a river and rivers carry things away. Wine is a citizen, even when cut with water. Vinegar is an old soldier, posca. Vinegar and water. Cools the mouth and scolds the stomach into obedience. On hot months, it is as common as dust. There is, too, a tonic that tastes of half, a pinch of wood ash whisked into the cup, a ghost of last night's fire. It is not glamorous, but bones read it like a letter. The calcium knits, the strontium whispers down the spine, and a rib that might have cracked on the third exchange merely complains and carries on. A gladiator's body is an argument with edges. Softness is strategy. A ring of fat blunts shallow cuts, makes a rib slope forgiving, stores a second wind behind the first. The pavement talkers who marvel at a champion's belly miss the point. He has padded his fate. It takes force to open a man who is not all ridges. When the blade does find blood, depth matters more than theatre. The lanista knows this. The cook knows this. And the fighter counting under his breath as he chews knows it best. Training eats more than meals. The palaestra consumes calories and gives back caution. Wooden swords heavier than any iron teach wrists to float while shoulders burn. Lead weights pull at forearms until even a net feels light. Sand sucks at ankles. The legs reply with stubbornness. The quintain, that post with a swinging arm and a shield nailed to it, teaches timing without mercy. 10,000 small angers. The body against itself teach patience disguised as repetition. Between drills a ladle appears. The cook's apprentice becomes as beloved as a brother. After practice, oil is rub and ritual. An unctor masseur, alchemist, smears olive into skin until it shines. With a strigil the sweat is scraped away in amber curls. Some save the scrapings in jars, labelled with names worth selling. There are always buyers for the sweat of the brave. It is superstition and business. The usual Roman marriage. Then cold water shock, 1 breath, 2 and a sit in shade. Bread returns, darker now, and a smear of fish sauce that costs more than it should, but tastes like victory. Injuries are a private alphabet. The medicus gladiarius reads backs like ledgers. Here a knot that means yesterday's feint was too sharp. Here a bruised ridge that means the helmet sat wrong on the brow. He knows which knee swells after 3 bouts, which shoulder slips when tired, which man lies about pain, and which man joking is a symptom. His tools are simple, cruel, and kind. Bronze knives, needles, clamps, cups for bleeding, cups for suction, wool, linen, honey, vinegar, splints of ashwood warmed over coals, so they learn the curve of a leg before a leg begs it. The doctor's first act is not a cut, it is a look. Pupils for concussion, pulse for panic, a hand on the abdomen to listen for silence where gurgle ought to be. He will decide in a breath whether a man returns tomorrow or a month from now, whether a rib can be bound or a lung must be begged to stay put. For punctures he pours wine or vinegar, not as sacrament but as acid that keeps rot from writing its law. Honey on a dressing sweetens more than mood. It starves the tiny lives that love warm blood as much as crowds do. Pain does not frighten the ludus. Infection does. Bronze and boiling water are a romance that saves more men than any charm. When fire must speak, the iron is applied in a breath and removed in sense. The smell drives weaker stomachs to the door, but no one laughs. Cautery stops a bleeding that would end a contract and a life, and then time takes over, wearing the wound down like a beach wears down a wave. There are drugs, yes. Plants whose names taste like the soil they grew from, poppy that makes the world smaller, mandrake that hushes a scream into a sigh, henbane that dislocates a man from his body for long enough to fish a splinter from near a tendon. Dosages are mosaics of caution and audacity. The medicus learned them from a teacher who learnt them from a soldier who learnt them from a shepherd whose goat ate too much and slept for a day. Not all science begins in a library. Bones make their own music. Fingers, wrists, ribs, these can be tuned and taped and persuaded. A femur is a verdict. A spine is the law itself. Broken noses are signed in profiles that become portraits on tavern walls. Collarbones knit under figure-8 bandages that ache like patience. Ankles are mummified in linen and hope. Dislocated shoulders learn humility under a stick and leverage, while a friend holds the other end and says a word that is half prayer, half curse. The quiet science lives between shows. Rehabilitation is a geometry, angles, ranges, lines applied to meet. The medicus prescribes circles drawn in air with a toe, grips closed against a wedge, a palm pressed into a wall, while a breath counts slowly to 6 and back. The masseur breaks adhesions with thumbs that do not care for dignity. Afterward, the man stands and finds his neck belongs to him again. No one claps for this. That is why it works. Food changes with wounds. Barley thickens when healing calls for more. Beans multiply into 3 meals when a man must grow a new layer around a cut. Salt increases for a bleeder. Water is rationed like respect for someone whose face is swelling. The ash drink returns like an old friend. Whenever bone is grumbling, sweets appear suddenly for the pale and the newly stitched, because even Rome admits sugar is medicine when taken as mercy. The arena, for all its theatre, runs on logistics. The lanista balances risk like a banker. He will not throw his best man into 3 afternoons in 5. He will not feed a young left-hander to a champion with a habit of turning right unless he is buying a lesson on purpose. He reads the doctor's notes as if they are weather, not a forecast, a warning. Avoid heavy helmets this week. No twisting feints. Keep left foot down on exits. These are small orders that prevent large bills. Some injuries are peculiar to styles. The Rotarius's hands split along the thumb web from rope, vinegar hardens, oil softens. The balance is art. His calves bruise where the Secutor's shield kisses in hurry. The Samnite groans under shoulders punished by the big scutum. He learns to sleep face down, arms under a rolled cloak to coax the ache away. The Pharyx's thighs are constellations of purple moons, where the curved blade finds meat again and again. A Besta Arius wears scratches that never properly heal. Cat Claw is a pen that writes name after name on forearms. Sometimes the doctor fails. A fever takes a man for reasons that look like punishment and feel like love refused. A wound that seemed trivial yesterday is a funeral today. The school gathers at dawn, oil lamps held low, and the lanista speaks briefly, because the living need practice and the dead need quiet. A friend scratches a small symbol into the plaster above his sleeping niche and touches it before every bout for months without saying why. The cook ladles more porridge than is needed, then eats the extra herself. The city moves on, but not all at once. Myths sprout in the gaps. Gladiator blood cured epilepsy, they say. A cup to the lips of a sufferer still warm from the sand's heat. Gladiator sweat sparks desire, they say, mixed with perfume and dabbed where the pulse is shallow. The medicus rolls his eyes and counts the coins. He is no priest of Nemesis, but he will not insult gods that help a payroll. Meanwhile, he sterilizes his instruments by fire and mixes salves by weight, not rumor. You can live inside a superstition and still make a science with your hands. Sleep is a tool that does not glitter, so men forget it and then remember. In summer, the ludus is a basin that holds heat into the night. The quartermaster hangs wet mats where breezes condescend to visit. Helmets are hung on pegs, like heads taken off safely. Greaves stand like sentries at the foot of pallets. Someone snores in triplets. If tomorrow is someone's day, he lies awake for an hour, then another, and finally sleeps with a fist unclenched on his chest, as if holding a coin he refuses to spend. There are small mercies that look like nothing, and are everything. A girl from the bathhouse sends a ribbon for luck. A boy from the kitchen saves the best crust from the bottom of the loaf for a favourite. The medicus lets a man talk while he stitches, and discovers that words do as much good as wine for pain that can be described. A veteran shows a newcomer how to tape his fingers, so the last knuckle stays human. The lanista pretends not to see an amulet tied around an ankle with red thread. Nemesis can share a room with common sense. When the trumpets sound and the sand pulls at feet, all this quiet science disappears under the loud one, but it is there. In every foot placed where a ligament won't howl, in every breath taken from a diaphragm trained to be a bellows, in every decision not to lunge off the bad leg, in every parry made at the safe angle 3 inches outside where a cut would open a story that ends badly. Survival is composed in kitchens and clinics. The arena just reads it aloud. Night returns the men to the counting of spoons and scars. The doctor writes notes by oil light. Crescens rib 7. Right, bind loosely. Paris knee, cool compress. No torsion. Hilaris rest. 2 days, do not trust him. He wipes his hands and looks at his own palms. More map than flesh by now. Tomorrow there will be new blood and old tricks. And he will practice both arts, the one that keeps a man's name on a poster, and the one that keeps his name from a stone. He blows out the lamp. The courtyard keeps breathing. The ludus sleeps, fed and mended, and thinking of iron. The provinces teach Rome to speak many accents. In Gaul, a hill town takes an earthwork hollow, lines it with timber, and discovers a weekend that feels like a holiday. In Hispania, a colony of veterans builds a circle in stone so tight the sound rolls back on itself and kisses the faces that made it. In Africa Proconsulares, the amphitheatre blooms like a bloom that remembers rain. The stone is honey-coloured, and the sky is a dome that makes a drum of every cheer. In the Danube lands, frost is a second audience. Planks creak, breath makes ghosts that shout back. Rome does not conquer only with legions, it travels with stages. First go the surveyors and the priests, counting and chanting in equal measure. Then come the walls, the forum stones, the bath, whose steam will make citizens of strangers. And almost as soon as the pipes are laid and the basilica's echo has learned men's names, a curve begins to rise from the dust, an amphitheatre, wooden at first, then limestone or basalt, when the local quarries learn Rome's hunger. Where there is law and calendar, there will be sand. Capua may be a mother of schools, but daughters scatter. Familiar gladiators string the map with lines that look like rumours until you set them to a calendar and realize it is logistics. Spring in Campania, summer in Narbonensis or Baetica, where the heat makes blood redder, autumn at the edge of the world, where rain turns sand into dark bread. Winter is for repairs, for replacing ropes, for negotiating next year, in rooms where wine dilutes suspicion, just enough for hands to meet. Roads make this possible. The via are ribbons of certainty across geography's shrug. Carts bear helmets wrapped in wool, shields stacked like loaves, spears bundled into sheaves that whisper in a dry voice. Animals travel too. A leopard stares through the bars at a landscape that confuses his nose. A bear dreams of forests while the cart bumps, his chain a sentence he cannot pass. The men walk, ride, or sit on wagon tails and learn the empire with their eyes. Cypress that recite Italy, plane trees that suggest Gaul, olive slopes like thoughtful brows, cliffs that mean Britannia is near, flat light that belongs only to Africa. Local elites learn the Roman word for generosity, yorgetism, and pronounce it with their city's flavour. The curial class in a small Gaulish town votes a budget for games at the festival of the imperial cult. In the Greek East, inscriptions are bilingual, Latin crisp beside Greek cursive, promising Venetianers in the morning, pears in the afternoon, and lanterns at dusk, so the last bout's decision can be seen by gods and men alike. A proconsul in Africa declares that his day will feature a hunt of Carthaginian style, and everyone understands it means abundance with choreography. Ocean and river are roads too, when patience and coin suffice. Out of Alexandria ships bring animals and rumours out of Carthage, a cargo of teeth and claws and handlers who speak to beasts in 3 languages, and none of them Latin. The Nile's mouth tastes of silt and futures. The Rhona whispers vineyards and taxes. The Tiber hums like a vein that feeds the heart and the heart's theatre. The emperor's mail makes guarantees. The wind adds footnotes. The sea laughs at schedules and then sometimes honours them. Midday clowns play the same jokes with new props. The Greek East finds them too rude and laughs anyway. Africa loves them, and also judges their footwork. In the afternoon the pairs speak the empire's common tongue, shield and sword, trident and net, curve against line. In Spain someone starts a chant that never quite catches on in Gaul. In Gaul a rhythm of clapping outruns the drum in Africa and returns a year later, changed. The amphitheatre is a school where nobody sits still and everyone learns. Architecture teaches the eye how to shout. In Italy, seats cling to earthworks. In Gaul and Africa, they stride in arcades lifted by archers. In Britain, the first circles are timber and ditch, then stone when rain proves too patient for wood. Hypergear, the underworld of rooms, lifts, corridors, grow more elaborate as the frontier learns tricks from the center. Trapdoors become pauses in a sentence. Lifts become exclamation points. A provincial amphitheatre may never sew sailcloth into sky, the way Rome does, but a clever local engineer can make a door open at the right drumbeat, and that is nearly the same magic. The program travels well because it was built to travel. Morning hunts are always local and foreign at once. Bulls from nearby farms that will be roasts by nightfall. Panthers that no one has seen in these parts since a sailor told a story in a tavern 10 years ago. The hunters, venators, are part soldier, part dancer. They pace distance in strides that a mason could measure. They use spears and prudence, nets and nerve. The crowd learns rhythms so quickly you'd think they had always known them. The tease and turn the moment the animal's line of travel becomes fate. Children in Pannonia shout at the right time the first time because spectacle is a language you can read without letters. The law seats the provinces much as it seated Rome, senators and equites. If any are in town, sit where they can be seen. The municipal council has its bench, soldiers gather under eyes that they pretend not to notice. Women further back, or in their own wedge depending on the temperature of morality that year. The local peculiarities creep in. In a Greek city that never much loved Rome's straight edges, theatre and amphitheatre share duties. A wooden arena floor is laid over an orchestra, and Tragedy's house borrows a bloodline for a holiday. The statues in the Scaenephron's watch and do not comment. Touring troops court local heroes. A rising murmillo from a town in Gaul returns in bronze and plume. His first salute is to the wedge where his cousins sit with eyes too bright for comfort. He fights as if he were mowing a field that owes him something. Afterward, the taverns add his crest to their signs and sandwiches acquire his name. In a Greek port, a rhetorius with a talent for theatre poses on the harbour wall, so that the statue of a sea god in the distance looks like his trainer. People laugh and buy tickets and teach their fishmongers new jokes. Advertising is a provincial art. Painted notices bloom on plaster walls near markets. X pairs beasts from Numidia, awnings promised if the wind is gentle. Names are spelled as their owners prefer, or as the painter guesses. Accents migrate inadvertently. Someone scratches a correction in a different hand, and tomorrow that hand will have a wager in it. In the East, programs praise the editor's philotemia, love of honor. In the West, his librolator's open hand. Both mean bread and spectacle, which taste the same in any tongue. Animals make their own geography. In Africa, the morning program is a zoo that believes in dramatic irony, ostriches that dart like punctuation, lions that stare like magistrates, hippos that look like a bad idea, until they become a worse one. In Britain, the day is deer and boar, and the occasional bear that arrived more famous than it deserved to. In the East, leopards learn to climb stage scenery fast enough to terrify without undermining the carpenter's confidence. Handlers are poets in scars. They read an eye and predict a sentence. Security is part civic training. In a town newly colonized, the day doubles as a lesson. This is how we sit. This is how we leave. This is how we shout without tearing the place down. The vigils learn local faces. Ushers learn local tempers. In Pompeii, a brawl with visitors earns a decade's ban, and the provinces read the decree like a parable. Honor your guests or lose your afternoons. Most towns are obedient. A few discover that a little civic pride can sour into something else if fed beer and insult. The amphitheatre forgives once, twice it remembers. Temples to Nemesis sprout near gates like hedges that keep pride from creeping in. An altar tucked in. An arch asks both fighters and editors to remember that balance will have its say. Inscriptions in small, careful letters. Thank the goddess for a wound that missed the artery by the width of a fingernail. In bigger letters, donors thank her for crowds that stayed happy, even when the wind snapped the awnings and the best pair ended early. The goddess appreciates both forms of piety. She likes her bills paid. The arena carries empire in reverse. Men who never saw Rome learn it in miniature. The ritual, the seating, the thumb that hovers between mercy and example. The emperor's face on a coin tossed at midday is small, but the habit of catching becomes a citizenship of its own. The provinces send back, in exchange, accents and tricks, a new drum pattern from Mauritania, a hunting harness from Thrace, a style of shield edging from the Danube that resists splintering during winter. Rome is a hub. The spokes teach the hub to be a wheel. Money moves like a second audience. A troupe arrives in a river town without a grand editor, and improvises afternoon by subscription, seats rented by guilds. A local innkeeper sponsors the clowns in exchange for their shouting his stew's name during a chase. In a rich city, a governor spends as if poverty were impiety. Elephants process to announce a new aqueduct. The crowd drinks in his message and his wine. In a port, sailors on shore leave fill the upper rings with noise that reminds fighters of storms they've never seen. There are places where the circle meets stubborn ground. In Antioch or Smyrna, Greek theatres' old gods argue with Rome's new habits. Compromise is wood laid over marble, and a promise that the blood will be hosed discreetly into a drain that leads where no nymph will mind. In Judea the crowds are thinner, the appetite uncertain. In Britannia the appetite is enormous, the weather argumentative. North Africa turns out in linen and fervour. Germania arrives wrapped in furs and curiosity. Everywhere, once the first afternoon is over, the second is easier, and the third efficient. Habit is empire's most faithful general. Seasons write schedules. In winter the Danube towns focus on theatre and baths. The amphitheatre waits under snow like a lion under a cloak. In summer Africa must stage hunts early, or the sun will hunt the hunters. Awnings become benevolence made silk. The east contends with dust that settles on tongues. Vendors sell sour cherries for thirst that cannot be named. Gaul enjoys evenings when the light lingers and shadows from the arches draw lines across faces so that everyone looks like a coin. Sometimes the circle is borrowed. A legion builds a timber ring outside its camp and hosts a day for the locals. A letter home will call it diplomacy, but the soldiers call it something else, practice. Off-duty men sit impossibly straight in the viewing wedge allotted to them and will learn to slouch later. Their commander makes the right face when the editor salutes and spends the rest of the afternoon watching how men move when watched. There are lessons everywhere if you are the sort of man who thinks so. Art remembers what dust forgets. Mosaics in villas far from Rome show nets and fish, tridents and helms, the amphitheatre brought into dining rooms where guests can argue about a feint while a servant pours wine. In a town near the Rhine, a floor depicts a secutor and Rhyterius so well you can see the breath dampen the net. In Cyrenaica, a wall painting captures a leopard with a paw just lifting future coiled in a single claw. These are advertisements, memorials, daydreams baked into lime. When the amphitheatre is quiet, the house speaks for it. Rome has not moved, but Rome has been everywhere. A child in Tarraco can shout Missio with the accent of the Subura. An alderman in Nemausus can purse his lips at an editor's extravagance exactly as a senator would. A baker in Londinium can cut a loaf in the shape of a shield, and have customers who know the joke without explanation. The circle taught them. The circle keeps teaching, one afternoon at a time. The end of a provincial day is always the same. The crowd descends in spirals, bodies unwinding from tension to silence. Streets fill, bakeries sell out, taverns discover that a city can drink 2 days' wine in one night, if the right man survived a difficult moment in the fourth exchange. The troupe counts coin by lamplight, the lanista negotiates the next town's morning pair, and thinks in distances rather than faces. The amphitheatre empties into crickets and dogs. 2 boys sneak in to race across the sand and try on helmets too big for their necks. The moon sits in a sky too large for any capital, and yet the circle below looks at home. Tomorrow the troupe will load the carts. The nets will be folded, the helms wrapped, the spears counted. The leopard will stare the same stare, uninterested in geography. The road will pull, and the map will rumple. In some other town, someone is painting a wall with names he does not yet know how to pronounce. promising beasts he has never seen, and when the trumpet sounds there, that city will learn Rome's heartbeat and find that it fits. Before a name becomes history, it must first learn to be a rumour. The amphitheatre churns out more than sand and breath. It presses afternoons into stories and sets them loose to breed on tavern benches, at fountain rims, under colonnades where shade is a currency. By night a feat is already taller. By morning it has grown a crest. A city does not keep account books of awe, so it pays in legends instead. Pictures help. Tile by tile, a villa floor preserves what a crowd shouted and forgot, a retiarius's net arcing like a moon flung too low, a secutor with eyes narrowed to slits by his smooth-faced helmet, palm branches curling upward in little spirals of pride. In Gaul a dining room shows a pair frozen forever in the 3 inches before decision, wine spilling in red threads across the scene, when a guest laughs too hard at the host's boast. I saw this one. In Africa a wall panel gives a leopard the courtesy of dignity, its steps head turning, as if the painter asked its permission. A lamp burns with the same image in cheaper clay. Souvenir sellers know the alphabet a city will learn most quickly. Helm shapes, weapon silhouettes, the gesture of victory. Oil lamps stamped with tiny gladiators light kitchens and cellars. A woman tips one to see if there is enough oil left for the last hour before dawn, and the shadow of a 3x with his curved blade glides across her wall. Children blow the soot and duel with sticks carved into something that feels like a grip. The arena has become a toy, which is another way to say it has become a language. Names find bodies and then slip free of them. Flamma, flame wins, wins, wins again. Declines the wooden sword of freedom 4 times, so the story goes as if liberty itself could not tempt a man who understood the exact price of applause and had already paid it. Nero favors Spiculus so lavishly that envy becomes a kind of cologne in the Subura. Carpophorus in the hunts kills an unreasonable number of beasts in one unreasonably long morning, and future mornings adjust themselves around his legend as if sunrise owed him a debt. A poet, quick-fingered and quick-tongued, writes epigrams that turn into pocket-sized monuments. He praises, mocks, immortalizes with equal ease, and in a few lines gives Priscus and Verus an ending better than any cut could make. Both fight so well that the emperor grants both a rudis, the smooth wooden sword that means a man's contract has exhaled its last breath. The crowd learns to cheer for the improbable, 2 victors, no loser, and to quote the poem at parties where the wine gets ahead of the facts. The rudis is wood, and it is also a key. Carried home, it sits above a doorway like a household god. Sometimes the man who earned it comes back through the same door with a different contract. Instructor. He becomes a memory with a whistle and a cane, correcting the stance of boys who already know his mosaic by heart. Legends can be loud, but they are kept alive by quiet work, a grip adjusted, a step shortened, a habit unlearned before it becomes a scar. Not all fame wears laurel. Graffiti does better business than marble. In Pompeian scrawl a hand boasts, Celadis suspirium puellarum, Celadis, the girl's sigh. Another scratches, Crescens victories 39, and then a different knife adds, envy. A third line, softer, reads like a prayer, Severus, be victorious. Love letters to men who cannot answer, except by surviving a little longer. A barber keeps a chalk tally by his shop door of bets settled and bets disputed. If you pay late, he shaves you uneven on purpose. The lanista understands the theatre behind the theatre. Stage names stick because iron has always loved poetry. Felix, for the one who had to beat misfortune in private, before the public could see it. Hermes for the foot-fast man who never let his calves forget ladders. A Thracian by birth is styled Thrax in the ring, even when his tongue has learned Rome better than it learned its mother. Sometimes the exotic is a costume tailored to a crowd's taste. Myths take their vitamins from moralists as much as from fans. A philosopher sniffs that the midday shows are too cruel, even for a stomach trained on Stoic doctrine. But his letter, Tut-Tutting, describes the precise ghastliness with a vividness the crowd envies. A satirist sneers at ladies who love the sweat of men with broken noses, and writes the scene so sharply that even his disapproval shines like a stage lamp. A historian complains about emperors who play at gladiator, and by the complaint teaches generations exactly how the emperor looked when he raised his blade. And there are emperors who cannot resist the mirror. The arena holds up. Commodus steps into sand, gilded by his own opinion, kills tamed beasts with an actor's flourish, and styles himself a new Hercules inside a city that knows Hercules' price. Senators grind teeth into pearls. The crowd enjoys the novelty as you enjoy a storm that cannot last. The records that curse him also polish the image until it gleams. It is possible to be ridiculous and unforgettable. The empire learns this lesson more than once. Fables walk in from the edges. A runaway slave plucks a thorn from a lion's paw in some telling or another. Later, when he stands where sand is a judge, the lion recognizes him, and the amphitheater recognizes what? Mercy, gratitude. The story is rearranged for each audience but never loses its teeth. Children learn it, governors repeat it when they want to appear better than their laws. And somewhere a real lion limps across a real morning without knowing it has become a metaphor. Death, too, is curated. Funerary stelae show a secutor in profile, helmet smooth as a river stone, palm branch curling behind him like a tail of wind. Beneath, a brief biography, 26 years, 19 fights, 14 victories, 4 missio, 1 fate. A wife paid for the stone, a brother carved the letters. You can read courage and economy in the same lines. The dead are made tidy because grief is not. Sometimes a small boy is carved at the base, reaching up, sometimes a little dog. The stone does not explain the dog. It does not need to. The market for relic and remedy growls along beside devotion, neither embarrassed by the other. Vials of gladiator sweat sell to women whose friends pretend not to notice the purchases. Cups of blood are touted as cures for the falling sickness. The medicus rolls his eyes and sterilizes a needle. The seller counts coins and tells himself that hope is a medicine like any other. Underneath the commerce is a truism as old as temples. The brave leave traces and the living are hungry. Because the amphitheater is a factory for memory, it teaches technique that will outlive the trade. A tall glass from the Rhine country is incised with names and helmets, the letters trapping light like fish. It ships south and ends up in a cupboard in Ostia. A century later, it is found and becomes a museum that fits in a hand. A knife handle, carved with a tiny retiarius, changes owners 5 times before someone who never saw a net understands immediately what he is seeing. Sex and scandal do their part because cities are made of people, and people are ridiculous. A senator's wife runs off with a gladiator. A historian makes her immortal in a paragraph that rings with contempt and a strange undertone of admiration. Another lady stands too long by a school's gate, and the gossip grows legs. The household slaves bring home versions of the tale in the same bags with the vegetables. The barley eaters are supposed to be infame, socially stained, less than clean, but desire is disinclined to respect theory. Over years, the crowd learns what it wants to remember. Precision in equipment becomes part of the legend. The man with the crested helm with the 3 studs on the brow, And with that, artisans become curators of identity. An armourer adds a ridge where a hero once had one. A painter lines a shield with a familiar scar. The fighter inside the costume ages, changes, retires. The persona remains on lamps, cups, mosaics. A city can hold two truths at once, that men bleed and that stories don't. Even the gestures fossilize into arguments for distant ages. Was it a thumb up, a thumb down, a turned hand, a precisely angled fist? Contemporary crowds did not annotate, they lived. Later we will squint at marble, at paint, at words that mean too many things, and turn the ambiguity into myth too. That in itself is testimony. The legend keeps breathing because we cannot stop listening for it. At night, after the last wagers have been counted, a fighter sits in a cool courtyard with a cup of posca and a bandaged finger. He hears from the alley a boy reciting his name with a particular reverence that belongs to people we don't know. He smiles into the vinegar and water and knows that his morning is already a mosaic somewhere, a lamp elsewhere, a sentence on a tavern wall in handwriting too large for the space. He is bone and breath. He is also the raw material of myth. Both truths make sleep possible. And if you walk a century forward, the pictures remain good company, their colours humming like remembered crowds. A villa floor survives a fire and a famine. A lamp is found under ash that fell in one terrible afternoon. A cup is dredged from silt and looks at once familiar and improper in a glass case. Legends are stubborn because we built them to be. They carry us gently over the places where facts are thin, and they let us love what we cannot touch anymore. The gods of the arena. Fortune, nemesis. The warm-handed household spirits of courage accept the trade. In return they hold, for us, a grammar of bravery and a little furniture of glory, palm, helm, net, sword. The wooden rudes lifted the way a man lifts a child. These are the syllables. We speak them still without realizing, every time we cheer too loudly for a well-timed feint in a game that is not war. Sleep now with a tile floor under your cheek, and a line of tiny tesserae making a curved sword you can trace without lifting a finger. The legend will keep while you dream. It was built to... Everything ends twice. Once in the world and once in the telling. The games did not slam shut like a door in a storm. They dwindled, sparked, flared, and went on again in corners while the center forgot. Imagine a long twilight, the silhouettes of arches, a drumbeat softer each year, the sand still raked smooth in the morning, because habit is a more patient engineer than law. First came money problems. In the 3rd century, the empire coughed and stumbled, coin grew thin, and cities learned the arithmetic of shortage. Soldiers needed pay before crowds needed wonder. Walls needed mending before arenas needed marble. Municipal elites, who once competed to feed their city's appetite for spectacle, now counted grain with pursed lips and measured public gratitude in lamplight instead of lion. Some still spent, but more became prudent and called it virtue. Then came new prayers. Christianity did not arrive with a badge. It moved through households like a quiet rumor rephrasing the world, 2 neighbors at a time. Its teachers had sharp words for spectacles. The shows seduce, they said. They give you other people's vices as souvenirs. One writer lists the colors, the costumes, the clang of trumpets like a lover. Then he burns them like a convert. Another tells a story that will not die. A friend resistant to the amphitheater, dragged there by other friends, he resolves to keep his eyes closed. A roar from the crowd opens them. He drinks the sight as if thirst itself were a sense. He leaves hooked. The moral is stern and tender. The soul is porous. But devotion did not mean a straight line from altar to edict. Emperors in the new faith had older habits. Constantine professed Christ and still wrote letters that sent criminals to the beasts. Frowns creased his laws around Ludi without erasing them. The administrative machine had grooves cut by centuries, hands fell into them even as creeds changed. You don't turn a river with theology alone. You need dams, diversions, 1,000 shovels. So the schools trained a little less, the games cost a little more to stage, and bishops preached a lot. The law flickered the way lamps do in a breeze. Some edicts curtailed the shows on Sundays and feast days. Others forbade the training of new fighters in a city that needed recruits for the army more than it needed duelists for its afternoons. Governors wrote back with practical problems. Sentences had been passed, contracts signed, animals already purchased from Africa. Exceptions were made, as exceptions are always made where calendars meet coin. There was also fire, the ordinary kind. In 217 lightning struck the great Roman amphitheatre, and the wooden superstructure caught a conflagration that turned afternoon into crimson night and left the bones of the building smoking like an enormous altar. Repair took years, money, a will that had other claims on it. When eventually the arena reopened with marble cleaned and seats repaired, a thin line had already been drawn in the city's mind between what was essential and what was ornamental. Earthquakes followed in later centuries, shrugging stone out of its pride, and each repair stitched more slowly than the one before. And yet, a city is not a manuscript you can edit in the margins. It is a mouth that keeps practicing sounds it loves. Into the 4th century crowd still filled local amphitheatres. Wealthy men still draped generosity around themselves, like a cloak, and called the crowd's delight their honour. In North Africa the hunts remained hectic and theatrical. In Gaul clubs of enthusiasts saved for annual shows, the way families save for weddings. In the East, where theatres were old and tragedy had deeper roots, the amphitheatre persisted as a seasonal accent, a spice on the city's tongue. Churchmen sharpened their warnings. Avoid the spectacles, they said, for they will climb into you like ladders. Sermons replaced some afternoons, processions others, and martyrs' feasts gave communities new calendars to plan around. The rhetoric blackened the games with the soot of demonic imagery, and a person who wanted to be good learned new reflexes about where not to sit. But human hearts are not spreadsheets. Reform is a tide with eddies. There were still bishops who had once been boys sneaking into the cheap seats. Their homilies were firm and sometimes wistful, which is to say, human. A story grew, a monk stepping between fighters, the crowd turning from blood to silence, a ruler issuing a ban that sounded like a prayer. Theocritus, Telemachus. The names shift as parchment shifts in the hand. Some set the tale in Rome early in the 5th century and attach to it an imperial decree. Others place it elsewhere. The details tremble, but the point does not. A single body in a circle can reteach a crowd how to see. Whether the story happened precisely or approximately, it became true in the way parables become true. It changed decisions. Honorius, the emperor in the West, signed papers around that time that read like closure. No more gladiatorial schools. Cease the games, keep the peace. The East had its own prohibitions and preferences. Even where law was strongest, animal hunts continued longer than duels. The moral arithmetic was more forgiving of claws. In Rome itself, beast shows flickered into the 6th century under Gothic kings, who wanted to look Roman on Roman stages. Chariots stole the audience anyway, a racetrack's thunder replacing the ring's pulse. The hippodrome, with its colour factions and racing gods, inherited the appetite and painted it a different hue. The buildings learned other trades. Markets moved onto floors where sand had swallowed so many promises. Vendors shouted where heralds once did. A donkey left a pile where a champion had left a shadow. Workshops sprouted in the cool under arches. A leather worker looked up at a carved victory wreath, while he shaped straps for a sandal that had never touched an arena. In one city, the amphitheatre's vaults became housing for the poor, the arches curtained like modest mouths. In another, a small church took a bite out of the curve, then another, until holy days outweighed holidays. Stone is patient but not sentimental. Iron cramps were pried from joints and melted into tools or icons. Blocks were rolled into new walls that promised a different sort of protection. A medieval family fortified the great Roman ring and made a castle from it for a century or two, old power repurposed as new, until even feuds found fresher architecture. Goats grazed where trumpets had challenged courage. Grass is a diarist who writes slowly and always in green. Memory did not vanish with the budgets. Preachers kept the games alive by preaching against them. Poets kept them alive by diluting them into metaphor. Even the law that collected previous laws, the way late empires liked to gather their own reasons, contained ghosts of shows inside its prohibitions. Language learned to call a moral struggle an arena, to make an adversary a wild beast, even when he was your own impatience. Monks spoke of spiritual combat with a seriousness a lanista would have recognized. A city that had once cheered for an elegant parry now admired a man who fasted without boasting. Technique survived, changed clothes. On quiet afternoons, the empty rings were not quite empty. Children crawled through low arches with the permission of cats. A shepherd boy shouted to test the echo, and laughed because the past still knew how to answer. Lovers sat in the shade of a gate and swore promises in a place that had hosted other vows, other proofs. Grass made its case for mercy by being soft every time. There were embers, not merely ashes. In provincial towns, a rich man with old tastes could still buy a morning of boars and bulls when the calendar did not forbid it. An amphitheatre, patched and repurposed, might host a Saints' Day procession that entered under arches built to frame palms of victory, and now framing palms of psalms. Pagans did not vanish. Christians were not monoliths. The long ending was a braid of tolerations, resistances, sighs and substitutions. And always the weather. Rains worked mortar loose where human hands had grown careful. Frost taught stone new vocabularies of fracture. Ivy remembered a time before architects and spoke it eloquently on the walls. Fire and faith each unmade the games in their fashion. Fire with a rush, faith with a rhythm. Both left heat behind. You can stand now, centuries later, on a terrace halfway up a broken ring, and look out at a city that has traded bronze for glass and gladiators for traffic. The wind is the same wind. It smells, perhaps, of bread more than of oil and sweat. The oval below is a meadow that remembers geometry. If you close your eyes, you can still sort the sounds, the leather slap, the trumpet sentence, the gasp that always follows a mistake. When you open them, you will see pigeons making deliberate choices where once men did. The long ending teaches us patience with endings in general. Institutions die the way trees die, leaf by leaf, limb by limb, with a ring's worth of record left for anyone who knows how to count. We inherit the vocabulary and use it differently. A stadium this weekend fills with a roar that has nothing to do with palm branches or pardons. Two athletes face each other with rules and referees and futures. The crowd's throat does what it has always done. The old gods might smile. Nemesis still keeps books, though her pen is subtler now. If faith helped close the circle, it also kept a few circles open. Stories survived because homilies needed contrasts, because monks copying manuscripts doodled in margins, because a bishop remembered a childhood, and let the memory give his sermon texture. Fire helped too, by deciding what would not make it across the centuries, and therefore letting some things shine brighter by survival. That is the paradox of ash. It erases and underlines. One last time. Imagine evening. The amphitheatre is a rib cage letting swallows through. A child, indifferent to doctrine, drags a stick across dust and draws a helmet larger than her head. Someone in a nearby house lights a small lamp with a stamped figure on it, net, trident, shield, because even when the games are gone, the little images still mean skill, courage, a tidy pose against difficulty. The lamp flame catches and steadies. The city puts down its tools. Night remembers how to be a roof. Sleep here where echoes have learnt decency. Faith did what it does. It turned appetites into arguments and then into customs. It turned some customs into prohibitions, and some into metaphors. Fire did what it does. It consumed, cleared, and made room for grass. The games ended slowly, and then completely, and then they did not end at all, because the words they taught us still work. Before a crowd can roar, someone has to pay the bill. The arena looks simple, from a seat, sand, shade, steel, decision. Behind that simplicity lies a bookkeeping as intricate as any battle plan. A day of games begins months earlier in a doorway where a patron weighs reputation against coin, and where a steward unrolls a wax tablet dense with the arithmetic of ore. How many pairs, which kinds, what beasts, what music, what chance of weather, what chance of glory. In the oldest stories, the Munas, the duty, was a funeral gift, a debt of honour paid to the dead with the lives of the living. But duties have a way of turning into calendars. By the High Empire, the munera were municipal fixtures, civic proofs, a way for ambitious men to buy not only applause, but also memory. The inscription a benefactor dreams of is short and heavy, dedit ludos. He gave games. Underneath, the careful details, how many pairs, how many days, how many exotic animals brought by how many ships. Reputation is a ledger item with no upper limit. A sponsor's steward starts with beasts. The Venatio costs stretch their claws first. Fees to the provincial contractor who knows which desert yields the best cats and which marsh the angriest boars. Bribes at river docks where a chain rattles faster for extra coin, fodder to keep anger alive, but not exhausted. The wages of men who can walk past a lion's cage with both hands steady. The animals are a parade before they are a peril. The crowd likes to see stripes and spots and horns under the morning light, and spotting a leopard before it spots you is a kind of status the city accepts as currency. Then the people, fighters are owned, rented, or borrowed. A lanista maintains a school like a banker maintains a vault. He knows the value of every man there, as both body and brand. Purchase price for a newcomer, rental fees for a proven name, bonuses for a style the crowd prefers this season, the way it prefers a cut of cloak. Contracts specify the number of appearances, the kind of opponents, the share of prize money, the conditions that count as missio mercy granted, life spared, so that the law of the sand feels less like weather and more like policy. The lanista's own book is another jungle of lines. He pays for barley and bean mash that builds a fighter's frame and for the ash beverage that helps knit bone. He pays the cook who salts the mash properly and the medic who knits men when bone fails. He pays the maker of helmets whose rivets do not betray a neck in the 3rd minute of the second bout. He pays the farrier for the school's mules. He pays the boy who rakes the training yard until it looks like possibility. The school is a machine that turns mornings and sweat into reflex and nerve. Machines eat money the way lions eat meat, without apology. Octorati, freeborn men who sign themselves over for a fee, complicate the line items and the morals. The contract they choose is clear ink obliterating old privileges. The infamia that follows is a stamp that does not wash off. But debt has teeth, and pride has its own arithmetic. An octoratus takes the entry money, lives by rules his signature agreed to, and tells himself a quiet truth at midnight. Every trade is stained somewhere. His wages are not a soldier's steady pay, but a lattice of appearance fees, purses, gifts, and the gleam of prize crowns turned later into coin. Prize money is a schedule as carefully studied as a horoscope. A win against an equal, a larger purse. A win against a heavier opponent, larger still, a bout deemed elegant enough to be extended by popular demand. A supplement, even a loss can pay, if a fighter's grace turns a crowd from judge to patron. The palm branch becomes a tax-free rumour that the tavern recashes in praise. The sponsor's steward lists the rest, heralds to recite the pairings, trumpeters whose lips can find the city's heart, the rope and pulley crews who fly the velarium, the great awning over the stands, and the sailors borrowed from the fleet to tame that sail when the wind invents its own show. The carpenters who build temporary scenery for beasts, making a North African morning from timber and paint. The equerry who keep the fountains working between acts. The sweepers who rake the day flat again after each set of choices has darkened the sand. The public part of the ledger is generous. The private part is brutal. Distributing free bread in the forum the week before a show is not charity. It is advertising in a language every stomach understands. Painted notices on a wall, programmata do their own cheerful math on such and such days, so many pairs from such and such schools with beasts from such and such lands, sparsiones promised, scent sprinkled, summa rudis supervising, an experienced referee with the long wand of authority, and a sponsor's name spelled just a little larger than the gods. Boys memorize the posters the way they memorize team rosters in a later century, and fathers who pretend not to care correct a mispronounced name without looking up. Tickets tesserae can be carved bone, stamped lid, baked clay, a palm-sized promise that your seat exists before you arrive. Many shows are free. The sponsor buys his reputation wholesale and gives it away retail. But even a free seat costs someone a morning, and the ushers enforce the ancient etiquette of rank with the modest tyranny of men entrusted with ropes. The seating plan is the empire's social diagram, elliptical and unforgiving. Senators close to the action, equestrians behind, citizens tiered above citizens, women and the poor higher still, unless law or custom in some cities rearranges the scheme. A boy with a clay token learns where his future is supposed to sit. Vendors run their own economies inside the economy. Wine watered exactly as much as the law requires, and the crowd tolerates. Bread buns slick with oil and comfort, sausages whose smell writes its own graffiti on the corridor walls, sponges, cushions, little bronze charms shaped like helmet crests, a child's first arena. A sausage sells twice, once to the mouth and once to the memory. The vendors have calculating eyes and generous grins and conduct more market research in a morning than a senator's staff can manage in a month. The arena staff is a city within a city. Harundinari, men with poles, encourage beasts toward the right gate when a queue flutters late. Bestiani feed and clean and coax, and sometimes pray. Custodes keep knives where they are supposed to be, and spectators where they are supposed to stay. Vigils watch for fires. The water crew watches for thirst. There are men whose whole pride is the pattern they rake into the sand between bouts. There are men whose job is to count bodies on stretchers and mark them in a book without flinching or flourish. Catastrophe, too, has a budget. A burial club, Collegium Funeraticium, takes monthly dues from fighters who prefer a predictable end to a pauper's ditch. The school may maintain a plot, and a mason ready to carve fought 19 times, defeated 4 times, honoured twice. The medicus earns his money in degrees of triage, a stitch for the flesh that will hold, a curse for the helm that did not, a phlegmatic note in the casebook that the crowd will never see, that a historian will one day read and call evidence instead of mercy. Beasts are a line item and a thesis. The empire's edges supply its centre with trouble, ostriches that run like rumours, giraffes whose arrival is a reason in itself, bulls with lunatic shoulders, cats with their own logic. Procurators in Africa and Syria keep accounts of capture cages and losses in transit. Shipmasters count coin and carcasses with the same hard elegy. A handler on a dock somewhere counts the sleep he will not have. When a hippopotamus dies at sea, the expense ledger writes another number. The city writes a different story. The god of the river would not cross. Imperial shows turn the arithmetic imperial. A day of 100 pairs, or 500 beasts, is a river of money. An emperor's largesse can flood a schedule for months. The return on investment is measured in loyalty, distraction, and the myth of abundance. A province that received too many tax assessors last winter might get too many shows this summer. A governor who needs the city's mood to be softer next week spends heavily this week. Bread and circuses, a satirist mutters, but the city knows the truth is more complex. A government that pays for wonder is teaching its people what to ask for. There are lean years. Coin grows brittle and small. Soldiers demand more. Frontiers demand everything. A plague carries off the afternoons. A sponsor tightens his purse. A city pares back to hunts and pantomimes. The lanista looks at a training hall and invents new efficiencies in the space between pride and famine. A few schools lend experienced men to drill the militia in shield drill and advance. A different kind of contract, a different kind of honor. The machine does not run without ink and gossip. Handbills circulate with pairings for the morning. Names inked that were once carved in the school's oak. Helaris versus Silax. Thracia versus Milo. Retiarius to follow in the third. A child traces the letters with a fingertip. The paper costs less than a date and more than a whisper. In Pompeii, voting notices and show bills share the same wall. Politics and spectacle are, as always, good roommates. Risk management can be a prayer or a spreadsheet. Whether a fighter's family receives a lump sum on his death depends on the school's policy and the city's habits. Whether a maimed man receives a pension depends on the sponsor's vanity and whether the crowd noticed his name when it was glorious. A wooden sword, the rudis, is a freedom document and a retirement plan. Some men hang it above a doorway and learn the work of instruction, turning the fictional interest the city pays them, applause remembered, into a real wage. Corrections, drills, the art of surviving into usefulness. Not all costs are coin. A sponsor gambles his prestige on the weather and on the crowd's mood and on the competence of men he cannot control. A school owner gambles a season's profit on a boy whose wrists are almost right. A fighter gambles the future he once imagined against one he can feel under his fingers. A wife gambles her patience on a wager her husband keeps making. The arena writes futures at a rate that terrifies the cautious and convinces the brave they have calculated correctly. On the morning itself, the management shows as choreography. Officials in the lowest ring confer with the summa rudis about a point of technique that the audience will translate into justice. Scribes tally outcomes with shorthand accuracy, while the herald holds a note until his breath writes its own applause. Gate crews exchange hand signals that look like dance and are in fact safety. The Valerian billows, and the sailors talk as only men do who are handling a creature bigger than prudence. The city too makes money in small increments. Lodging houses full the night before, taverns go light on water and heavy on charm, dice games collect from nerves, girls sell their laughter, boys run messages with accurate legs. A man who has no interest in shows sells cushions to men who do, and then buys a fine fish on the way home to feed a family that has learned the moral economics of other people's pleasures. If you've ever lived through a festival, you know the way the whole city learns to breathe in money and breathe it out as stories. What does a day cost? Enough to build a shrine, enough to repair a gate, enough to keep an army satisfied for a week. What does it buy? Heat, belonging, an afternoon in which you and your neighbor agree about something large. It buys a sentence in stone that outlasts the sponsor's rivals he gave. It buys a chance, if you are the man in the sand, to convert practice into proof in front of witnesses no ledger can dismiss. When the last trumpet is coiled and boxed, the stewards count, the patrons preen, the vendors scrape a little more fat from the pans. The lanista tests a hinge on a gate and wonders which boy is ready for the next leap forward, and a medic sits on a threshold with stained hands, dividing the day into could-have-beens and was. The machine quiets, not stops. A city's economy is not a heart, it is a lung. It moves what keeps you alive, and you sleep because the motion is regular. Tonight, let the numbers hush you. 10 pairs, 3 missio, 1 rudis, 27 palms, 2 bulls, 1 leopard, 38 vendors, fined for watering wine, 5 wounded, 2 cured, 1 healed enough to tell the story tomorrow in the corner of a courtyard where a boy with a wooden sword can listen. The accounts balance as they always do when memory is part of the currency. Close your eyes. The sand will be raked smooth again before dawn. Someone has already paid for that, and the city will dream on schedule. Ruins sleep lightly. Touch them with a question, and they wake. For centuries after the crowds went home, the amphitheaters stood like ribs, letting swallows through. People moved in. Goats negotiated the stairways with their confidential hooves. A noble family somewhere fortified the curve and called it prudence. A mason took iron clamps out of old joints and gave them new lives as hinges. A monk traced a cross on a column that had framed palms of victory and asked it to frame his prayer. The old shows were ashes. The words they taught the city remained in the air like a scent. The medieval city used what it had. Stone is good at forgetting what it was when you ask it to hold up your new roof. The ring in Rome lost teeth to builders who preferred ready-cut blocks. An earthquake rearranged dignity into rubble. Ivy made the case for mercy without a sermon. Stories persisted. People said martyrs had died there. They said this arch remembered a vow. They said you could still hear the crowd in the wind if you stood on a certain step at a certain hour. Stories keep stone warm. Renaissance curiosity opened shutters. Men with notebooks and long patience measured the ruins not only with rods, but with metaphors. They wrote Roma instaurata, Rome restored, on a title page, and meant by inches and drawings to put time back together. Architects traced the ellipse and discovered how to seat a world without a corner. They counted arches and learned rhythms. Brick never confessed when it was unbroken. A poet brought moonlight to the ring and made travelers weep without quite knowing why. The ruin became a school. Names migrated and stuck. A sculpture of a Greek fighter, lithe, poised, not a Roman gladiator at all, was christened the Borghese Gladiator, and the name taught viewers what to see: danger, grace, a frame designed around a decisive second. Mizening is a kind of conjuration. Once you have called a thing gladiator, it leans helpfully toward the energy you expect. Artists sketched the statue until its angles entered their wrists. Hands learned what the eye adored. Engravers such as Piranesi made the Colosseum into a dream machine of ink and acid. He printed the ruin in inks so black they turned daylight into astronomy. In those prints, arches do not merely curve, they imagine infinity. Travellers carried the sheets home and hung them over desks where they planned buildings that would never be built, and buildings that would. The ruin became exportable, a folded sublime, a mail-order solemnity. The church put its arm around the old ring and gave it new uses. Stations of the cross walked where blood had been and was now metaphor. Crosses stood where standards had once been. A pope decreed the place sacred to massacre memory, even as historians argued about precisely where the worst had happened. Whether lions had ever met saints there, in a specific sense, mattered less than that. The city needed a stage for grief. The arena had always been good at teaching strong feelings where to sit. Romantics fell in love. Byron wrote his moonlit Colosseum and taught generations that ruins weren't broken. They were honest. Gibbon read his History in the Curve and made of decline a style that later centuries have imitated like a fashionable limp. Painters gave the oval a habit of evening so convincing that noon became an impertinence. The ruin learned to pose for thousands of eyes without blinking. Archaeology, which is curiosity with a spade and a method, climbed down into the hypogeum, the understage that had been filled in by centuries of rain and civic indifference, and found the pulleys and corridors where mornings became drama. The theatre of the beasts, the elevators of surprise, the slots for gates that rose like eyebrows at a queue, all still there, sulking, ready to explain their craft to anyone who would stop calling them legend and start calling them engineering. In a different city, bones turned up in a cemetery attached to a school, men with arms scarred like biographies, bones thick with a diet's minerals, marks that matched helmets and blades. Science learned to ask the same questions a Lanista asked, and to answer them with isotopes instead of instinct. The answers were not more ethical, they were more precise. Modern rulers borrowed the ellipse for their own dramas. A regime with a talent for spectacle cleared houses away from the ring to make a boulevard of sightlines, set statues back on pedestals, and rehearsed parades that told the world the past belonged to the present, not the other way around. Flags took the place of awnings as colour against stone. Crowds learned new chants for new masters. The ruin remained ruin, and added the lesson that every age wants an arena. A different kind of showman took over in the 20th century. Film discovered that the arena fits in a frame like a confession. Quo Vadis gave us Christians and lions arranged so neatly that doubt became an impoliteness. Ben-Hur made chariots into ballet and the dust into incense. Spartacus stirred revolution into the sand and salted it with the conviction of actors who knew how to be larger than a screen. Gladiator, with its bravura dream of justice through combat, landed like thunder in a summer century and gave the world a question it murmurs still. Are you not entertained? Yes. And what does that make us? Peplum films, sword and sandal extravaganzas, taught children in far countries what a Roman helmet looks like even when the details were bravely wrong. A thumb became a verdict, up or down, because a painter's fancy hardened into film grammar. The real gestures had been subtler, but subtlety looks like hesitation on a screen. The misremembered is often more vivid than the remembered, because it is engineered to be. Stadiums carry the memory forward in steel and concrete. An ellipse speaks crowd fluently. The rake of seating writes the same sentence in dozens of modern dialects. The tunnel where players wait is the Porta Libitinensis, the gate of goodbye translated into foam and leady. Team colours in clusters echo the old chariot factions, even when no one remembers the blues and greens by name. A scoreboard is a palm branch that can count. A replay is the crowd's ancient desire to see the exact moment again and again until the soul learns what the body already knew. Combat sports draw the line, even bolder. The weigh-in is a ritual the Romans would have understood down to the last glare. Promoters are lanistae with better tailoring. Purses and pay-per-view percentages are prize money in future tense. Fighters cut weight like monks master appetite. They thread between bravery and self-preservation with a grace the old crowd would have honoured. Doctors ringside, a referee's hand stopping a bout before death has its way. These are mercies learned from centuries of outcomes nobody wanted. The word gladiator is used on posters to stretch courage across eras. The men and women in the ring do not need the word, but it looks good in bold, and the crowd knows what to feel when it sees it. Elsewhere the word turns playful. A television show in the late 20th century lets contestants with foam weapons sprint across obstacle courses, while a crowd applauds the shadow of danger it knows will never fall. Children in backyards rename their games for an afternoon because the syllables taste like bravery. Video games build digital arenas where avatars bleed pixels and recover when the console tells them to. The old appetite is not wrong. It has learned new ways to feed itself without biting. Reenactors stage afternoons the past might recognize. A city park fills with canvas and leather. A school sets up a yard. A scholar explains scooter and gale to families who handle replicas and feel the weight settle into their wrists. The air smells of oil and care. A fighter demonstrates a drill, slowly enough for the eye to learn. Step, set, strike, recover. Nobody dies. Everything instructs. The applause is soft and precise, like an affirmation spoken into a friend's ear. Tourism does its own gentle theatre. At dusk, the Colosseum glows honey gold against a sky that wants to be painted. Guides commit accuracy with affection. Visitors test their feet against ancient steps and find the incline steeper than pictures suggest. Somewhere a violinist sets up near an arch and plays a piece that has nothing to do with Rome and everything to do with romance. The ruin permits this. It has practiced for centuries at being a mirror. It reflects what you bring, but better. Memory can be a protest too. In our time, the old ring lights itself in warm colour when a government somewhere commutes a death sentence. The news mentions it, and 1,000 screens glow. The arena becomes a lantern against forgetting of cruelty, of courage, of how quickly a crowd can be taught what to cheer for, and how slowly it learns to cheer differently. The myths do not rest. Christians to the lion, someone says in a debate, compressing centuries into a taunt. Thumbs down. Another says, slicing compassion into a gesture that was never so simple. Scholars sigh, print articles, teach students, and accept that some myths do more work than facts, because they are easier to carry. The task is not to scold the myth out of the world, but to add layers to it until it tells the truth by depth, if not by outline. Meanwhile, the men and women who were once the profession itself have not vanished. They exist in bone in a museum drawer that is handled with respect and nitrile gloves, in inscriptions that still, after all this time, sound like introductions at a party, name, origin, record, virtues. A defected helm sits behind glass and looks as if it wants to tell you something about angles and breath that language cannot hold. A child presses both hands to the glass. The guard smiles. The ruin of bronze teaches without words. The afterlife is administrative too. Heritage boards argue over mortar mixes. Engineers reconcile a curve's majesty with a modern city's traffic. Preservationists walk the line between pilgrimage and theme park. Each decision is a bout between urgency and patience. A stone that has stood 2,000 years does not feel your deadline. It accepts scaffolding as a kind of jewelry and says nothing. In classrooms far from Rome, teachers use arenas to talk about ethics. What is entertainment? What is cruelty? What would you cheer for if everyone around you were cheering? They ask students to picture the sand and their own hands and to choose. The conversation is a modern munus, a duty performed for the dead and for the living who would like to become better ancestors. And at night, after museums close and souvenir sellers fold their tables, the afterlives of the gladiators slide into quiet places. A boxer laces gloves and remembers a story he saw on a screen when he was 8. He has made a better bargain with his future than those men did, and he knows it, and he is grateful. A nurse on a late shift thinks of the medicus who had fewer tools and the same determination. A woman who runs a small business recognizes every Lannister trick in a modern pitch and smiles because her instinct now has a history. What we inherit from the arena is not a thirst, it is a grammar. We learned from it how to admire skill under pressure, and how to spot courage when it is disguised as composure. We learned how quickly a crowd can metabolize surprise into fairness, how easily it can be taught to mistake unfairness for tradition. We learned to cheer and when to stop. We learned at last that spectacle is a lens, not the world itself, but a way of seeing it that can make us bigger or smaller, depending on how we hold it. If you close your eyes now, the afterlives braid themselves into a lullaby of different mediums. Ink lines deep enough for a finger to get lost in, limestone letters with shadows inside them. Film light that flickers on faces that are not thinking about you. A stadium's late-night hum after the last spectator has gone. Grass making its patient decisions around stones that will outlast everyone's opinions. The gladiators are not asking for anything. They have already given what they had. Their work now is to stay available as metaphor, as caution, as courage, with the sharp edges filed just enough to hold. Sleep with a postcard under your book and a movie line stuck in your head. You can't quite place. The past is not behind you, it is under you, like bedrock, like a promise. The arena has not demanded your verdict. It has taught you how to make one